Hello students, welcome to your test discussion for the ethics paper from 2026. It was a unique paper, it is a different paper from the ones that we normally see. Today we are going to discuss the detailed solutions. I'm going to go over what is the demand of each question, where we can source the points from, and what are the things that were to be written in the answer. There are certain things that we will also be able to identify um, to do with the ambiguity in the paper, meaning that when the questions are shorter, when the questions are sharper and single line questions with single demand, oftentimes the interpretations can be broader. So we will also see what are the different interpretations of the same question which are possible. um, as we go over the questions, I will also reinforce the outlines that we had seen in the reaction class. But today we'll be able to look at the questions in more detail. All right. So let's begin with part A, the first question. Owing to a paucity of time, a university professor generates a PhD evaluation report using artificial intelligence and submits it with some modifications. This is the situation which is given to us, and one thing that I want us to note for this attempt and future attempts as well is that when you have a detailed case study, when you have a longer question with a lot of details within it, the nuances are available to us. But when it is a short case study, I've taught you before that there are certain aspects of the case, certain information and elements that we will not be aware of. So there we have to consider the hypotheticals. Applying that same idea, that same paradigm to a question which is very short in nature and only tells us about a scenario, what you have to remember is that there are a lot of what ifs in this question. Meaning, all that we know is that someone, because of the paucity of time, because of the rush, has been able to use AI to generate a quickly worked upon solution. All right. So, because of that, there are certain arbitrary things, there are certain what ifs that we have to consider here. The demand is to discuss this situation from the perspective of accountability and integrity. Now, we would want to make two paragraphs from accountability and integrity, but I will show you how to expand the idea from the perspectives and point of views so that we'll be able to see what the answer is going to be. Now, the introduction is that we would want to define accountability and define integrity, but just those definitions are not sufficient. It is required for us to add some context to link the definitions to this statement in the question. What we've learned in MGP, what we've learned and reinforced in classes also is the fact that if you get a statement based question, granted this is a case study type question, but it is still a situational statement based question. So when you have a statement like this, writing the definitions itself is not enough. It is required for you to explain what the statement is saying, and that's why that context becomes important here. Now, we've also learned that when we have to do answer writing, it is a series of multiple decisions. It's a step by step process of making decisions. So when you see the two concepts of accountability and integrity in this question, granted you want to write the definition, but then when we see that we have a statement as well, so we will have to write context. Now, to ensure that our introduction does not expand too much, the thought process has to be to curtail the definition portion, that you write it in short then. All right, so that is the thought process that goes behind planning a question. After that, what do you write in the body? Now, when you have to discuss this situation, you have to talk about the ethical concerns, that what are the problems, what are the concerns that we see in this situation. Now, looking at those ethical concerns, what are the elements that we can think of? We can say in what case is the use of AI legitimate, till what extent. We can also talk about what is the course of action do you suggest in such a case. Now, what I want you to realize is that the legitimate use of AI and the suggested course of action are both things which are implicit in the demand. That means that the question is just saying discuss. Now, in your discussion, if you also want to include what is the right thing to do, when is the use of AI appropriate, or how to use AI correctly, in that case, you can add a little bit of this element to your answer. But please make sure that your majority of the answer has to be a discussion of this case. right? Then the conclusion is going to be, now if this is the sort of problem that we're looking at, if there are situations in which AI may be used or misused in academic research, then what is the conclusion? The conclusion has to be the next step, which is that what is the responsible use of AI and what is the utility of AI in academics. You can link it to that part, right? So you can link it to that element of the answer. Now, this is the brainstorming part of each question. And what we had discussed in your first reaction video was the elements of what can be included in the answer. So I am including both of these aspects in today's discussion so that you make a sense of what is the first response of an answer and also how do we academically genuinely write the answer. Those of you who are going to write their mains in the future, you have to realize that the way that we practice answers in classes, what we actually deliver in the exam, is a factor of what are the things that we have learned and what we think in the moment. That is why one ethics question can have multiple correct answers. That is what we have to remember. Now, the way that evaluators and examiners check your paper is to see if certain elements have been included in them or not. Now, this is the aspect that you have to realize that for preparation has to click in, has to link to questions that you've already done before. From our MGP, the questions that we have already practiced in a question like in a topic and in a context like this was about research ethics. So we've done questions on research ethics specifically, which can help in this case. And we have had questions which talk about AI use in multiple different paradigms. So that's why mixing these two answers, these two preparation elements together, we should be able to write a good answer. Now, what is the introduction? In the introduction, you write about what is accountability and what is accountability and what is integrity. And then right after writing that, so when you say that okay, accountability means that there should be someone or something who can be held responsible for the outcome of a decision, and integrity means that there should be consistency, there should be following of the values which are expected of the case, right? So that is what we have to talk about here. I see a comment, Saurav, we'll talk about case studies when I get to that part of the discussion today, all right? So when I go to that question, you please ask me then and I'll be able to give you a better answer. Coming back, so when I'm saying that you have the introduction in which you define accountability and integrity, so you should just add one or two keywords so that you're able to explain the meaning. But more than that, you have to give the context. So in the context, what I'm saying is that a PhD evaluation of a PhD report requires expert judgment, because a PhD by definition is the growth of human language. It will be something new which has been done. So for that, an expert has to be brought in, whereas the AI language models that we have right now are existing on working on extrapolating and creating similars of existing information. So naturally, this is an area in which doing something new and novel is already difficult for an AI to do. So PhD evaluation requires expert judgment. It determines the validity of the research. It is going to judge whether or not the scholar's work over the course of a few years has been valid or not. So what I'm saying is that it is a significant decision. Then it affects the academic career of the scholar. Naturally, whether or not their PhD work is supported or evaluated and judged to be correct or good, worthy or not, because of that, their career is going to be impacted. So the stakes are high. All right. So if you're able to give me context like this, and see, when I'm giving you answers in this form, that also means that I'm talking about elements of answers which may or may not be included. Meaning that a good answer, it is not necessary that you include all three of these elements. One or two of these things or something similar will also work as a correct answer. So in the first few questions that I'm discussing today, I'll give you all of the details so that we make sense of what the answers are. And after that, we'll move towards outline solutions and we'll be able to talk about the answers more. Anyway, the ethical concerns, which is the body of this question, is actually that now we talk about dimensions and the explanations. What I mean by that is that the ethical concerns that exist around this situation will have to do with different dimensions. Two dimensions are very straightforward and clear to us. First dimension is that there is going to be violation of integrity, and whose integrity? Academic integrity may be violated as a concept here. The second dimension can be that accountability is getting eroded. And the third dimension can be that there is a threat to fairness and justice. What I want you to realize is that violation of academic integrity and erosion of accountability, these two dimensions I cannot escape. These two dimensions must be included in your answer. But beyond that, something extra, other dimensions that you may want to write by expanding these ideas, that could be a threat to fairness and justice. And fairness and justice will be equivalent and linked to the concept of integrity. Integrity means that there are certain values which are to be held integral to the institution. So the institutions of academics, the universities, they must have fairness and justice. So that's why if they are threatened, then again the integrity of the institution is threatened. Then there can also be damage to the academic institution, again linked to the integrity, and you can add philosophical analysis also. But these are the optional dimensions, right? The additional dimensions that you may write in your answer. The non-negotiable dimensions are the ones which I've given in the earlier part, right? So first 2 points are must. After that, to extend your answer, you may add other parts also. We understand this now? What is the first dimension? The ethical concern in this case primarily is the violation of academic integrity. The first problem is that AI, the large language models, they have a lack of originality. They do not do new work. Substantially, they are generated by an algorithm. It does not do the real intellectual work which the professor was supposed to do. And because of that, it means that misrepresentation has happened. It means that possibly plagiarism could also happen, because the AI is only going to use earlier work and create something new. All right. So there is lack of originality, which is the first issue. The second issue is that there is a failure of intellectual integrity altogether, meaning that the PhD examiner who's supposed to evaluate the report, that examiner is supposed to independently assess the researcher's work, right? And that could be on basis of what the researcher's methodology, the process, their sources, their different intellectual work, all of those elements could be there. Simply modifying the AI generated report or AI generated assessment is actually escapism from the intellectual work that the professor was supposed to do. Because of that, I'm saying that there was a failure of intellectual integrity. Now, I want you to note and understand the way that I'm explaining what the issue is. Because of that, you may phrase it in different language. The same problem, the fact that the professor is not doing their true duty, who's not doing their actual work, the task that they're supposed to do, right? The intellectual labor that they're supposed to do. You may use any of these phrases to write this point, but it is a necessity that it should be included in your answer. Then there is also a breach of professional ethics. That means that academic professions, this job of a researcher, of an examiner, comes with certain responsibilities, roles, and behavioral patterns. If that is violated, then what has happened is that this professor, by doing this, by using this AI generated report, is actually violating his duty, is abdicating his responsibility to the scholars, to the university, to the subject, and to society as well. To all of these stakeholders, the duty of the professor has been violated. So that's why it is a breach of their professional ethics. Yes. Then there is the erosion of accountability. The second dimension that we have to talk about is the erosion of accountability. Erosion of accountability in the sense that if there is something wrong with the evaluation, if say for example the scholar does not like the evaluation, right, they should be able to go and ask someone, right? PhD is often done under a guidance of a professor, and there's going to be a question and answer. There is a lot of discourse that occurs there. If AI has done this evaluation, then there is nobody for the student to go and discuss this with, right? So that is why the thought process has to be, the issue is that human accountability cannot be delegated to AI. AI does not have agency. AI cannot be held responsible. An algorithm cannot be held responsible. So that's why this accountability cannot be delegated. And now this is a concept that reverberates across all of the AI questions that we write. So all of the AI questions that you've prepared for in your MGPs in our class, there we have discussed this concept again and again. And as for the ethics of research, this portion is coming from the research ethics question. Then The second problem about the erosion of accountability is that there is an inability to justify the conclusion. Meaning that if the university or the scholar comes and asks why this particular PhD thesis has been accepted or rejected, the professor may not be able to explain the reasoning properly. That means, number one, the AI cannot be held accountable, and because of using AI, the professor is also not being able to be held accountable now. So, from both of these places, the accountability is lost. The third thing is that there is diffusion of irresponsibility. If the professor says that no, it was not my mistake, it was because of the AI, so then there is nobody to be held responsible, right? So that's why it could also be misused as an attempt to evade responsibility. So these two elements of the answer are non-negotiable. But after that, I'm writing about the extrapolated points, right? These points you may or may not include in accountability also or integrity also, depending upon your phrasing. So, my first dimension is that it creates a threat to fairness and justice overall, that it is creating an unjust system. That means that AI systems may generate hallucinations, they may give wrong data, fake information, inaccurate, irrelevant, fabricated evidence. And we have examples for this, that we have major companies, major consultants who submitted work in which all of the reports and the indices were fabricated and hallucinations. So AI may hallucinate and give false data. Because of that, the system will not remain fair. Then algorithm may reproduce biases in training data and diminish novelty. What that means is that if the training data had certain bias, and think of this, what if this PhD this thing research is happening in a sociological study, what if it is a forensic study, what if it is a criminal study, in those groups, in those paradigms, in those subjects, if there is an error in the training data, if there is a bias in the training data, it will be extrapolated in the research. Because of that, again, we have an issue for the threat to justice and novelty, fairness. Then the third issue I see is that superficial assessment may fail to distinguish between genuine originality and good presentation. What that means is that if it is the AI which is doing the assessment, it is easier to fool an AI than to fool a human being, right? So for that, the issue becomes that superficial assessment can fail to distinguish whether the scholar has actually made the work, or is it that they're just throwing fancy catchphrases throughout the research. So the AI may not be able to distinguish and pick out those relevant details. Then it violates confidentiality by uploading all of this proprietary and sensitive data into an external platform. What I mean by this is that if the PhD research information, all of that data, that work, intellectual property is uploaded to a server for the AI to use, or for the AI to review, essentially what has happened is that a copy of that information has reached the company, the owner of the AI platform. Because of that, this intellectual property of the researcher, of the scholar, has already been given away, right? So there is a threat to data privacy also, and this becomes very, very significant if the research is on sensitive matters. Imagine if it is a research on particle physics which can be misused. Imagine if it is for say some design which can be used in weapons. So naturally these research elements may be proprietary sensitive information, so that can go to the wrong hands. Next dimension is that you can write about issues to do with the damage to academic institution. Meaning that if you give a PhD to someone who is undeserving, because of that, or even if you reject a PhD for someone who is deserving, because of that, what will happen is that you have eventually ended up ruining someone's career, right? Or the university's credibility. What that means is that if someone who's deserving does not get that PhD, because of that, the university's credibility suffers, right? Because they can't identify who's worthwhile. And if they give an undeserving PhD, again, the institution's credibility is faltered. Overall, now all of this is actually amounting to playing roulette, playing a gamble with the scholar's actual career. All right, so this is something which has high stakes. repeated ai use Repeated AI use can encourage a culture of credentialism without competence, meaning that if this becomes the norm, if people are constantly using AI to just check left, right, center, whatever situation may be going on, just to award PhDs and degrees like that, overall what happens to academics as an institution, as a entire thought process, as an entire process in society. It will lose its credibility, and people will PhDs will also lose their credibility, because you will have credentials. People will be a PhD without having the competence, without having the ability. Then it also undermines public trust in universities. If the process of awarding PhDs is not sure, if the process of academic rigor is not maintained, then people's trust in universities will also falter. All right. Now, apart from these things, one of the ways that we've learned to be able to write good ethics answers is that always remember to include a big picture view when we are writing issues. So, overall, what happens in this entire case is that you can have poor consequences. So, you can think, okay, I want to apply the theories of consequentialism and say that in the long term, we have poor consequences in this, right? Then you can say that professor's categorical imperative, their content duty, is being violated. And you may also say that it is against the virtues which are required in academics, the virtues of integrity, honesty, rigor, right? Hard work, all of those things are violated here. Now, the next part of the answer is the part that you may want to write. So these are implicit demands in which you can write what are the ways in which AI can be used legitimately. For example, if AI was used by the professor only to correct the grammar, only to improve the readability of the assessment that he himself has done, right? So for that, you can use AI. Then organizing large volumes of literature. If all that the professor is using AI for is to organize the literature and just manage, say, citations, that is a utility of AI which is legitimate. Then if what AI is being used for is that the professor is using it as an assistant, the professor is giving checklists and the AI is just maintaining the list there. So for that, what can happen is that professor's instructions can be utilized properly for training the AI. Then detecting inconsistencies for subsequent verification by the professor. If all what is being done is that as a preliminary run through, the professor is using the AI and then in detail they are doing the evaluation, then also it is okay. But what my question says is that he only made some changes. Let's go back to the situation. It says that using AI and submits it with some modifications. Now, this is ambiguous. We do not know whether it is good and detailed modifications or just superficial modifications. So, that is what I meant when we were talking about the ambiguity in the phrasing of questions. So you may write legitimate use of AI as implicit demand. You can also write what is the ethically appropriate course of action, but this will be difficult to do in a 10 marker. So that is something we have to be careful of whether or not we are able to write. Now, one of the ways of being able to use this content is also that it's not necessary that you write the entire appropriate course of action. Few of these points may also be used for you to write your conclusion. That means if what is required by the professor to do is to re-examine the complete thesis personally and prepare a proper evaluation report, that is something which you can end the answer with, right? Other similar course of action, other similar actions and tasks that they could do is that you have to verify every factual claim, citation, observation flagged in the AI generated draft, that you check everything that the AI has identified. Then the university should be informed that the AI assistant was used. Even though you've submitted the report, but now you have to come clean to the university, right? So the point is that even if you make a mistake, if you make amends, then it can be corrected. So the university should be informed. Any confidential thesis material uploaded to the AI software, the algorithm should be removed so that the scholar's intellectual property is protected. If paucity of time prevents a genuine evaluation, the professor could have sought an extension. Na? See, one of the things we have to remember is that if you're short of time, the solution is not for you to find a shortcut. Sometimes it is even sensible to simply ask for more time to be able to do your job properly. So, this is a reminder for that. Then, support institutional guidelines for responsible AI use. What this actually tells us is that we have a situation like this which can occur in academic institutions. So, certain guidelines should be created here, right? So, we've identified an edge case. All right. Now, what we have to remember is that when we prepare for the next year, what we have to pay attention to is this portion, that this is how we solve this type of issue. All right. And eventually what has to happen is that you have to keep knowing similar questions. Here we've been asked the issues, perhaps in a different question they ask us the solution. The conclusion, the things that you can write is professor's conduct is ethically unacceptable because he has outsourced the intellectual labor expected of an examiner. Or you can write about AI, that AI can improve efficiency of the final judgment, but it must remain human, evidence-based, transparent and defensible. Now, with all of these things, what do we have to remember for value addition? Here, I've scribbled very quickly that I may want to make the diagram of slippery slope. What this means is that in a paper like this, in which you see so much of applied questions, most of the questions are applied here, right? Situational questions. Here, integrating the theory can feel very difficult, or maybe it doesn't click very quickly. But sometimes, as you reach the end of your answer, sometimes, as you reach towards the end of your answer, you may realize that this entire case study is actually telling me that if I use AI in evaluation today, it can lead to worse things in the future. Then what you can do is that if you've seen in your paper that there are places, there are spaces in which some empty area is available, then you can remember that if there is a diagram in my notes, I may want to link it here. What that means is that where you've written the issues, where you have written the issues, you can simply say that today it is use of AI here, but tomorrow it can lead to misuse of AI even more, and eventually the credibility of the institution will be faltered. So as time and use of AI increases, the ethical concern will also increase. One of the things to be able to increase your marks in an unexpected, in a new, in a different question is that right next to your conclusion, you may want to add a diagram, or before you conclude, you may want to summarize the situation by adding a diagram like this. All right. So these things are what matter in our actual exam scenario, meaning that right before you finish your answer, please check if you can add something extra. That same thought process can be applied to a quotation. If you write a quotation about the ethical use of technology, again that can be used in the end. So the thought process is that once you've worried about the answer and you're able to make the linkages, you may even want to add certain elements by improving the final touch. The next question was, and see, the first question takes us a little more time so that we're able to talk about the way that we are studying all of the elements of the question. Now we should be able to move a little faster. The second question is, a business house is working on a project that can displace a forest community from their habitat. As the administrative officer of that district, what ethical challenges are you likely to face? So again, the question is about ethical challenges. The introduction is the ethical dilemma of economic development and the rights of forest communities, right? The ethical challenges here you can write from different aspects, and I'm giving you dimensions here which you may remember if you've done a question like this before. And this is for sure that in almost every MGP test that you've done, there is a case study of forest, economic development versus the nature and environment. So this is a subset of that, and from that you can add linkages. So you can make dimensions on justice, displacement, consent, environment, legality, administrative neutrality, everything. Now, the conclusion has to be that what we have to have is a rights-based participative developmental process. So these things are what have to go on in your mind and in the processing when you're reading this question. Now, this was the outline that I had given you in the reaction video, which was that we write certain challenges and we may want to suggest some solutions. Now, the introduction, the method of writing this can be twofold. So in this question, we'll see how we can write value-added introductions also. So a development project may generate certain positive outcomes. So because it is a dilemma, the dilemma will be between the benefits of one thing versus the benefits of the other, right? The importance of one thing versus the importance of the other. So development project may generate employment, infrastructure, revenue, and this is where you have an option for different words. What that means is you may say employment also, you can say infrastructure also, revenue also, right? You may say two of these or you can say something similar. So this is the way that I want you to realize that there can be variation in the answer, but it amounts to the same thing. Then the but its benefits cannot ethically be justified, cannot ethically justify the involuntary displacement of a forest community without informed consent, fair compensation, dignified rehabilitation. So again, these different subparts can be modified from there. Now, one of the things that we had discussed before you went to the exam was that it is a good idea for you to write a modifier, for you to give an adjective, for you to explain in one or two words of what is the nature of the conflict. All right. So that conflict becomes a little more evocative by simply saying that the displacement is actually involuntary. Then, the second type of introduction that you may write is from the point of view of the decision maker, from the district this thing administrator. So administrative officer, as the district administrative officer, I would face the challenge of balancing the developmental aspirations of the region with the community's rights, cultural identity, livelihood and ecological security. What I want you to notice here is that these introductions are coming from the way that we write our case study introductions, because we are lacking details in the question in itself. There is no area, there is no specificity. They've given us a situation. So that's why you may want to use one of these two types. Then, what are the ethical challenges? I'm giving you a longer list here, which include things like development versus displacement. Development is necessary, but the project may create, say, growth, employment, and investment in the region, industrialization, public revenue, all these things. But because of that, we can say that the benefit is the fact that okay, it can create these benefits, but will these benefits actually go to the people who are being displaced or not? Is it the greatest good of the greatest number or not? All right. Then the cost of displacement, the cost of this development is being borne by vulnerable forest dwellers, right? These benefits will go to the business house, but the forest dwellers are suffering. Then the ethical question is that can this displacement, can this development be called inclusive? Can this development be called inclusive when a group which is so powerless, when a powerless group ends up losing their rights, losing their value for the development of others? So is it truly common good or not? That is the question here. Then a utilitarian calculation is also something that you can mention, that okay, development versus displacement, the issues could be either we say that this development may not reach the tribals, or you may say that the displacement is happening without benefit of development coming to the tribals, or you can say that the calculation here has to be done through utilitarian means, but that itself is difficult to amount to, that itself is difficult to achieve. Do we see this? Again, I'm saying that the challenge is this, that there is a conflict between development and displacement, but the way that you explain it can be different for different students, and there is no problem within that. Then there is an issue for the rights of the forest communities. The rights of the forest communities must not be violated because they possess this thing. They possess customary rights over land, right? Their forest produce, क्या कहते हैं, timber forest produce. Then about water resources, about the sacred spaces, all these things. Even if formal land entitlement was not there. So if you're acquiring that land, that loss of the community is something which must be identified. The second thing is that this displacement may violate their right to livelihood, their culture, their autonomy, their community life. All those things are also a violation for the forest community. The third thing is that here, if such environments, if such regions are just taken over for business benefit, because of that, what that amounts to is the commodification of human life, of nature, um, the environment in itself. And then overall, the challenge is to be able to ensure that the rights of the forest community is not violated. We understand? So that's what I mean, that in these challenges, it is a good idea for you to be able to explain them in different ways. Then other challenges include the idea of consent and participation. You may want to write about justice in the compensation and rehabilitation, whether it is correct, whether it is proportionate, whether it is meaningful or not. And in terms of consent, we often say that it has to be free, informed, and a prior consent. Then there has to be environmental responsibility. What that means is that even if the land is taken over, even if the forest is felled, because of that, what has to happen is there has to be the responsibility of sustainability, of this thing, rehabilitation of the forest, right? All of those things are necessary. Then there is the conflict of interest and pressure. What that means is the business house is acquiring this region, and for that it is important for us to see that, to ensure that this acquisition is not happening by unfair means. ऐसा तो नहीं, is it not that there are political connections, that there are promises of personal benefits, there is some collusion that is happening in the way that this area, this land has been acquired. Then the politics may be involved here. Political leaders may have intervened in the situation. So all of those things also demand a check, that whether to check if there is a conflict of interest or external pressure in this particular case. Then there is the rule of law and expediency. What that means is that it's important for the administration to follow the rule of law, but at the same time, it is also important for them to not let this project stay stalled. Stalling of important economic projects is also an issue in the country, that sometimes the development of the state of the region cannot simply happen because the government is keeping the project stalled. So again, we have a conflict there. Then there can be a law and order and democratic dissent issue. What that means is that it could be that the community is resisting and that could lead to protests, and because of that, that can create more problems. So we have to remember for that. And transparency and public trust, that the entire process should be handled in a transparent way and to ensure that the public trust is maintained. I want you to realize that the initial points are closer to the situation. These points are closer to the demand, and these are the points which are a little bit forced. They are a little bit distant. They are a little bit more what if in nature. When we are writing our answers, we have to remember that these points will have more merit than if you are writing points like these earlier on in your answer. So one of the ways to self assess your answers is also to see if you are writing the major points, right? Whether or not you're writing minor points is a different story, that can add value if they come in later. But if you want to evaluate your answers and check whether or not you're meeting the demand, make sure that the core points are written early. Then you may want to suggest a way forward here again, which is the ethical course of action. And just in the previous question, in that same way, I'm saying as way forward, as an element, as implicit demand, you may add this to your answer, but this is not necessary for you to write for sure. So you may want to conduct an independent assessment, ensure meaningful consultation, verify the customary rights, examine alternatives, protect from peaceful dissent, and so on. Conclusion is that the challenge is not to choose mechanically, but to ensure whether development is pursued through just, sustainable, democratic means. The officer must act as a trustee of public resources and constitutional values. Now, there are different modalities of these. This conclusion that you're writing here, I'm giving you the statement based conclusion, but overall there are multiple ways for you to add value to this answer. What that means is that you may want to link to preamble, that the preamble establishes that we must have justice in social, economic, and political spheres. And this is a case in which this issue is being tested. Some people may want to write about ethical principles, about distributive or procedural justice, equity, precautionary principle, intergenerationalism, everything. Administrative values also you may want to write, your Nolan values, that it's necessary to have impartiality, compassion, transparency in this case. Beyond that, you may want to write a quotation about environment and development that we've prepared, right? And this is the simplest one, that the earth has enough for everyone's need but not for everyone's greed. So that may be written. You may want to write about Gandhiji's talisman, and you may even write examples from contemporary times or old ones in which the business has been set up. So even if you're writing about the nano plant, or if you're writing about the newer Kalpakkam issues, all those things you can include in this answer. The next question was, and see, from here the questions become a little tricky. This question reads that an endangered tribe has developed a severe skeletal deformity. This question requires for us to read it very carefully. It is an endangered tribe. That means that the tribal population in itself is low. They may be even more vulnerable and threatened. They are by nature, by design, we know, by definition, we know that this is a tribe which requires extra care from the administration. So that is why we have to pay attention. We have to be mindful of the fact that it is an endangered tribe. This tribe has developed a skeletal deformity which is severe. So Again, the second thing I want you to notice is that this deformity is severe. Severe deformity means that it is going to create bad outcomes, and they are significant bad outcomes. And I want you to notice that it is a skeletal deformity. It is there in the bones, right? A university research has identified a mineral supplement as a possible remedy. Please note, it is university research and we just wrote a question on research ethics. If the university research is legitimate, then this is a great input. Yes, but we've just seen that university research itself could be risky in certain cases. However, it has identified a mineral supplement, that it is some supplement, calcium ion, something like that, a mineral supplement as a possible remedy. Please note that it is remedy which is not equal to treatment. Remedy is a solution, but it may be a partial solution, it may not be a permanent solution. So it is a remedy. Then, even though clinical trials are yet to be conducted, it is a possible remedy, but clinical trials have not been conducted. Then, should the district magistrate use this research on the tribe? Okay. Now, as the core answer, the reaction answer that you must have to this question, the answer is no. The district magistrate should not use this remedy directly on the tribe. Okay? And we're going to talk about the reasons why. We're going to see how it could be a reasonable way, but what is the right way of doing it, we'll have to see. The introduction here is going to be that we highlight the core ethical dilemma. Then we may want to examine the issue from medical and administrative ethics. Then there should be courses of actions that are possible. You may want to write a balanced way forward, right? Amongst these, you can discuss the answer, right? Then what has to happen is that the non-negotiable portion is the balanced course of action. What is it that the DM should do? That is the answer that you have to write here. The conclusion was okay, that compassion must operate within scientific evidence, informed consent, and institutional accountability. Here, this is the outline that I had given you, in which we'd said that it is important for us to be mindful of the course of action. The introduction of this case, what I'm choosing to do is to write the summary of the case. That in this case, what has happened is that we see that a mineral supplement is offering hope to a vulnerable tribe, but there are clinical trials which has not been conducted. The remedy may pose unknown risks. So we don't know what the problems may be. Now, we're writing about the ethical issues and dilemmas. In terms of medical ethics, the problems are that it is an issue between beneficence and non-maleficence. What that means is that giving this particular medicine, right, this remedy, this mineral supplement, may have some benefit, but we also don't know whether it is going to cause more harm to the tribals. What if there are more problems that come in? It may prevent further deformity, but what if it gives another reaction? There may be dosage related complication, there can be drug interaction, there can be something specific which is there in that tribe. All right, so all of those issues are there, and the medical principle is first do no harm. The principle of non-maleficence is you have to do no harm. If you can't help someone, you at least don't create more problems for them. So that is important. So if you're subjecting a vulnerable population to an untested medication, the risk is that you may end up harming them. Okay. The second issue is that a possible remedy does not mean that it is the complete treatment. Again, look at the question. The question says that the university research has identified the supplement as a possible remedy. It is a possible remedy. It is not for sure the right treatment. So that's why again administering it immediately is a bad idea. Then the second issue has to do with informed consent and autonomy. The members of the tribe have to be explained what the situation is, where they're getting this deformity from, what the remedy is, and then their consent has to be sought. Just by the DM deciding this particular thing, this particular intervention is not fair. The tribal's consent must be taken, and for that, all of these different steps that must be taken, to have a translator, to have a cultural expert, to have that deliberation, even though it takes time, that consent and autonomy must be maintained. Then it has to do with justice and vulnerability, meaning it is not allowed, it is wrong for the DM, for the academics, for the university even, to do this to a tribe simply because they are endangered. It could be that the tribals are not as aware. It could be that the tribe is geographically isolated. The tribe may not have a voice. They may not be politically active, that they can, fight against this particular intervention. It should be ensured that their vulnerability is not being misused simply to do this to them. All right. And the same time, if it is potentially beneficial research, just because the tribe is vulnerable, the tribe cannot be stopped from gaining from it also. So from both sides, it is the same problem, that just because a tribe is vulnerable, it should not be, it should not be prevented from having a good intervention, and they cannot be subjected to a situation also. So that's why we have to actually pace ourselves and be careful. Then the scientific validity of this remedy requires to be tested, right? We do not know that whether this is that classic thing, that it may be that it is correlation but not causation. We are saying it as a possible remedy, but maybe there were some other effects because of which it is working. The second thing is that the research should, it is necessary that this research be reviewed by medical officers, by more researchers, and peer review should happen first. This is just a university research, right? So scientific validity has to be there, and more importantly, we have to have a scientifically designed clinical trial, so that this entire this thing intervention is actually checked, right? That systematically this entire intervention and administration of the remedy is checked. Then confidentiality and cultural sensitivity has to be maintained. What that means is that this community's medical information, the data privacy has to be maintained, especially from commercial exploitation and uninformed disclosure. This entire situation can be taken advantage of by someone to try and gain benefit from it. Then the entire research should respect the tribal beliefs, their culture, their customary practices, their cultural autonomy, and researchers must ensure that they're not using this tribe as a laboratory, that they're not being using this community and portraying them as biologically inferior. Sometimes what can happen is that the university simply wants to conduct research on tribals for some obscure study that they have, and that because the tribals are not aware of their rights, of their abilities, they may be taken advantage of. So the job of the DM is to ensure that this is protected. In terms of administrative ethics, it is the DM's duty to protect their life, right to life, right? That under Article 21, so the life and their the extrapolations of life, right? Whether or not they may have permanent disability, future suffering, or perhaps extinction of the tribe in worst case, all of that has to be prevented by the DM. It is important for them to protect the duty of life. Then, rule of law and institutional procedure. It is important that you have to realize that the DM themselves cannot just finalize and give the decision here. There is a different process that has to happen. So, I said that it is necessary for the DM to escalate this to ICMR, right? It is necessary that the authorities, the relevant authorities, and the institutions are involved in this case, so that it is done at an institutional level. There are ethics committees which should be formed, and legally mandated bodies should be able to make this decision. Then accountability and transparency should be maintained. That means that all of these details and steps of decision making should be maintained for further review in the future. All right. So these things also need to be maintained. After that, there may be a conflict of interest, that the businessman, pharmaceutical entity, or perhaps the university, all of these investigations have to be made whether there is a conflict of interest in this case, and it is necessary to balance public interest and individual rights. What that means is that relief versus long term safety has to be judged. The community survival versus individual autonomy has to be judged. The speed of the action and the intervention, of course, preventing this severe skeletal deformity is important. So how much time it's taking to make this decision is also critical here. All of these different elements are there, so that's why public interest and individual rights have to be judged upon. Then the conclusion and value addition here, you may want to write the course of action, or you may want to write about the different ways in which consent and medical ethics have operated, right? So here you can add the do no harm principle. You can write the course of action, in which, see, as a DM, what you have to do is essentially you constitute a team and try to make it a multidisciplinary team who are able to make this decision. You arrange an urgent independent investigation, you fast track the trial, right? The clinical trial. You should be able to seek approval from competent authority. There should be more investigation. There should be peer review of the research. All these things have to happen. And while you're doing that, you have to ensure that the tribal culture is treated with respect, right? Their autonomy, their consent is not violated. Now, the next question was discuss how national security can be balanced with the concerns of human rights. And this is one of the straightforward questions which is very short. What I mean is that this is a question which is easy to read and understand. That is not an issue. But to be able to write this answer, we have to realize that if you've studied this clear enough, it will click to you very quickly. What I remember is that this is an answer that you've written in ethics class itself about international ethics and national interest. We've even done this national security balance with human rights. Again and again, we've done these questions. So that's why this is an answer which is necessary for serious aspirants to have attempted well in their paper. This is the one in which your content should be strong. So, in the outline lecture, I'd said that yes, we are talking about the two dimensions, that national security on one hand and human rights on the other. And what we need is a middle path which has to talk about the elements of international ethics, right? So, how national security can be balanced with concerns of human rights. So, in the introduction, you write the dilemma, and then you say that inherently they are not contradictory. In the body, you write about the ethical tension, and then conclusion may you write the security through constitutionalism principle. Now, what is the ethical tension? So, arguments for security restrictions versus risk to human rights. That why is it that national security should be protected? Because it amounts to protection of life, of public order, collective welfare, protection of vulnerable citizens, emergency response, and so on. Now, please note that here when I'm talking about arguments for this restrictions for the benefit of security, I'm talking about the dimensions, that these are the things that you can write, that the state has a positive duty to protect the citizens from, say, terrorism, insurgency, organized crime, and so on. So what I mean by this is that this part can be explained. Then the risks to human rights are also there. For example, arbitrary use of power, erosion of privacy. There can be a chilling effect on democracy, use of force by national security. Then there is the risk of discrimination and profiling, impunity of the state, and counterproductive consequences. So across from this, you can judge which points you may want to include in your answer. But the core things you have to write is what is the ethical principle for balance and the way forward. Please note again, the question is how can they be balanced and not the contrast between them. What I mean by that is that when you have to write this answer, again, remember that when you plan out your answer, in the 2 pages that you have, the first part of your answer is going to be what is the dilemma. I want you to ensure that it ends somewhere on the midline of the first page, and then you start writing how to balance. And then the rest of your answer should be about balancing these two, because that is the core demand of the answer. This is the reminder that I'm giving you, that when you have the core demand of a question, 75, at least the majority of your space, 75% of your space or more, should be dedicated to that core demand. And that is true for all of the answers that we're discussing today. Whenever I say implicit demand should be the smaller portion, and the core demand should be the main portion. Of course, it can come before or after the core demand. So, core demand mein what you have to write is how do we balance these? You can write it through principles and you can write it through action. What that means is whenever you're giving a way to solve a problem, it can be through the intention or it can be through the action itself. Right? So, what this means is that we may get to choose whether we are writing the principles behind how to balance this dichotomy, or we may write what is the steps that should be taken, what are the steps that should be taken to fix this. So ethical principles for balance, you need constitutional morality, that all of the use of force is security policy has to be anchored in constitutionalism and the principles within that. Because of that, liberty, equality, dignity, fraternity, all of these things will be protected. Fundamental rights will be protected. Then, it is necessary for us to remember about the necessity and proportionality of force. And for this, you can make a linkage, a reference to the just war ethics. You may want to write about the genuine identifiable threat of the proportionate use of power, of less restrictive alternatives, of staged and phrases of interventions, and so on and so forth. Then, distinction between combatants and civilians must be maintained. Again, this is coming from war ethics. Then, due process and natural rights should be ensured. That means that the process by which the national security is pursued, that should be still in a way that natural justice is protected. What that means is that if there is arrest or detention, reasons should be given for it, right? Apart from that, judicial review should be operational. It is necessary for us to have timely investigation and trial, and so on and so forth. So, due process should be followed when force is used. Then, transparency and accountability should be maintained, and that means that details should be shared, that security agencies should also be subject to legislative scrutiny, that even though classified information must be protected, but necessary information should be shared with the civilians. And then there should be trust based security. It should be grounded in the idea of trust and securing public trust, right? The way forward is that we may want to have the rights based security doctrine. It may be that you want to have independent oversight, say parliamentary committees, it could be courts. Then data protection should be there. Surveillance should be for legitimate use only and not for creating a surveillance state. That police and security reforms are necessary, that training is improved, that forensics are improved, that capacity for forensic is improved. Then standard procedures should be established and protocols should be created. Then I've said community participation. What that means is that trust should be built through a dialogue, that stakeholders should not be excluded from the security process, and rehabilitation is more important than perpetual coercion. What that means is that if there is extremism, if there is a security challenge in an area, the root cause should be addressed instead of just having perpetual and permanent coercion. All right, so that is what we have to remember, and then ethical leaders should be followed. The next question was about democratic dissent in a state, which says that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had cautioned that employing civil disobedience within a constitutional democracy equates to endorsing anarchy. How should modern democracies navigate the ethical dilemmas posed by civil disobedience movements? Again, how should modern democracies navigate? So, again, we've been asked the course of action here. I want you to notice in all of these questions that when we are writing the answers, most of the content that we are getting to write in this year's paper is coming from the course of action and solutions to problems, right? It is either that you're explaining the challenges or they've been asked how to solve this problem. So a lot of this preparation is going to come from your case studies, course of action that we've done again and again. You've had handouts for that, you've had class discussions, you've done it in your tests also, so that should be able to help you write this answer. And that is the reason why this paper feels new and challenging, that it's coming, part A is coming from a place of preparation that you're not used to applying here, just that. So, the introduction is going to be Dr. Ambedkar's apprehension for civil disobedience in democracy. Then, body has to be the ethical justification and dangers. And then, balance of social justice and institutional stability. So, the introduction could be that you write what is civil disobedience and Dr. Ambedkar's view. Now, if you are aware of the fact that he calls it grammar of anarchy, that will give you a bonus point on this question, but that is going to come from a luck factor. This is something that people may know or may not know. It is not a direct part of the syllabus. Then, what is the ethical justification of civil disobedience? It is necessary to be used, it is necessary to be available as resistance to injustice. Meaning that if laws are systematically violating rights, if dignity, basic freedoms are being violated, it is ethically justified for there to be civil disobedience. Then it gives voice to marginalized groups and their concerns may be ignored by political institutions. So again, civil disobedience may be necessary, right? Then it has a corrective role in democracy. What that means is public movements can expose failures. Public movements and peaceful protests can compel governments to change their stances. So again, you can make a reference to the recent protests, right? The Gen Z protests, the education minister protests here. Then, so all of these campaigns are necessary. It reflects the moral courage and conscience of the society. It also acts as protection against majoritarianism. All right. What are the ethical dangers of civil disobedience? It includes things like undermining the constitutional institutions. What that means is that the main issue is the fact that if every disagreement becomes this reason to have civil disobedience, then the functioning of the state can get affected and constitutional institutions themselves may not work properly. Then it may encourage citizens to disobey laws with which only they agree, only the laws that they agree, meaning selective following of the rule of law. Then there can be anarchy and violence. Movements may disintegrate and degrade into violent movements. Then you can have majoritarian mobilization, that because movements depend on the number of people, on the masses that they are accruing, that could be an issue, that you have mobilization of the masses only. Then there can be economic and social cost to this, meaning that if you have prolonged shutdowns, if traffic is violated, road blockade is there, essential activities are blocked, because of that there are economic and social costs that the communities have to bear. Then there is also selective morality. What that means is that people may be invoking protests for their own vested interests. So that is also a concern here. And the other last point is that some platforms and certain this thing uh, protests may be created and born out of manipulation and misinformation. So here, for example, the Capitol storming in the USA, right? The Senate storming January 6th. That is an example of manipulation and misinformation, that sometimes the movements can simply be negative in nature, right? That they can be created because of fabricated this thing, claims and deep fakes and inflamed tensions, right? So that is also something which are the dangers of civil disobedience. How do modern democracies get to solve this? They need to make institutions responsive. The first thing is that institutions should be able to listen to the public demand. There should be public hearing and sabhas and audits and grievance redressal systems. Then there should be distinguishing of dissent from disorder. That is very critical. Just because there is dissent, that does not mean that law and order is at stake. Peaceful protest must always be allowed in a democracy. Then using of dialogue and mediation. Even if there is protest, is necessary that all party consultations and the expert committees and structured negotiations take place. Neither party, neither stance, neither group should be ignored. Then it is important for us to protect vulnerable stakeholders. What that means is that if there is a stakeholder with lower power, what that mean what that means is that the state will have more power than the innocent protesters. State should use legitimate proportion of power. The vulnerable stakeholders in that protest itself must also be protected, right? Then it is important to improve policy consultation. The root cause of this dissent is the fact that when policies are open for public consultation, the intervention was not happening there properly. So that's why that mechanism should also be improved. And overall, we also need to strengthen civic education. What that means is that people need to know about their constitutional rights, their duties, and because of that, democratic dissent also improves in quality. People protest in the right way. They respect public property even when there is protest, right? So that will require civic education. The conclusion is that okay, Ambedkar's warning remains relevant because in the current time democracy cannot survive if dissent is stifled, because it is necessary for us to listen to the people, for the people, everything. Then you can even say something like civil disobedience is ethically defensible in certain cases, when it responds to social injustice, when it is growth oriented. And the third thing is that the task of modern democracies is to do what? Is to transform protest into dialogue, to have dissent converted into institutional learning. All right, these things we write in the conclusion. Next question was, in what ways can an Indian administrative officer apply Gandhian notion of trusteeship to ensure fairness in this thing, governance? The introduction is Gandhi's notion of trusteeship, and then you link it to responsibility of a civil servant, thesis context. Then application of trusteeship for Indian administrative officers and the utility of trusteeship as a value. Then Gandhi's doctrine of trusteeship holds that. So in the introduction, you write the meaning of trusteeship properly, which is the doctrine of trusteeship holds that wealth, power, natural resources are not absolute private possessions, but they are held in a trust. Right? So this is from the outline discussion. How do you apply that in governance? The application of trusteeship in governance can be written as the public resources are used as a trust, right? It could be, for example, if it is land, if it is resources, water, mineral, public funds, all these things, they have to be used as common resources and not as instruments for private benefit, right? So that is the idea of trusteeship. It could also be about public money which is used only for sanctioned purpose, for preventing leakage, corruption. All these things means that public resources are to be held as a trust. Another dimension could be trusteeship in fair and inclusive welfare delivery, which is the second point that I've written here. Fair and inclusive welfare delivery. What that means is that the implementation of policies should be such that needs of the vulnerable are taken into account. It could be the basis of caste, gender, religion, political affiliation, that these benefits should actually reach the intended beneficiaries. Field visits should be there, so an officer will be able to do field visit if they have the idea of trusteeship in them, right? Then another dimension could be for participatory governance. If the civil servants think and know that they are acting as trustees, they will want to involve the stakeholders in policy decisions. Things like stakeholders like gram sabhas, local bodies, civil society organizations, and they'll be able to provide details in local language. The communication channels will remain open. So participatory governance will improve if you have trusteeship, and that will enable Gandhiji's beliefs in decentralization and Swaraj. Please note, whenever there is a reference of a philosopher in a question, it is beneficial for you to link elements of their philosophy here. What that means is that if you add a point, if you add a reference to decentralization and Swaraj in this question, because it is linked to Gandhiji's philosophies, it will bring you an extra additional mark. Then it could be about ethical regulation of private power. That means that private industry, that wealthy individuals may have power, but when the civil servants understand that they are trustees, they are able to regulate that private power properly. Then protection of vulnerable groups, forced evictions perhaps, or perhaps in accessibility of public buildings when it comes to forest rights, or about talking about vulnerable groups like bonded labor or trafficking and things like that. There also, again, acting as a trustee of public rights, the officer will be able to work better. Then, when it comes to intergenerational trusteeship, realizing and understanding that all of the resources, groundwater, and lands and biodiversity is for the future. So, sustainability point. And then you can also write about transparency and accountability will be maintained, and personal conduct of the officer. What that means is that when the officer realizes that they are also acting as a trustee, they will also not act in arrogant manner. Right? So that is also something that will be better. They will be able to refuse gifts. They will not be arrogant. They'll declare their assets. Corruption will go down. So all these points you can write. Now, please note that the way that I am writing these applications are from different places where trusteeship can be shown, right? So you can think of it in terms of subjects also, that I'm writing a political point, an environmental point, a social issues point. You can generate these points through stakeholders also, right? That in a public servant's life, who are the stakeholders which are involved? So from that also you can generate these points from the frameworks that we have. Then, what are the practical applications? Again, one of the ways for you to be able to write this answer is through example approach, meaning that if you think of the public finance, so in terms of that, for funds, you can directly write it will prevent fund leakage and prioritize essential public goods. If it's about welfare, so it will ensure last mile welfare delivery. Natural resources, industry, land acquisition, administration. So this is what I was saying, that if you worry about the dimensions, you should be able to generate the points for this question on the spot as well. The next question. Shakespeare in Henry IV says that arms are fair when the intent of bearing them is just. What ethical implications does this have in governance? So I'd said that if you're able to link this to the just war doctrine, you'll be able to generate your points a lot easier. And now I say that you should be able to have a lot of implications here, not just war. That you can make implications of legitimacy of state authority of intervention, state authority of exercising power. It could also be that about the right to protect life, about state's authority to not misuse public power in the way that you're using power. Overall, legitimate intent of the government is identified here. Then, another ethical implication is the ends versus means, meaning a just objective does not mean that every method to be used to gain it is legitimate. So, only legitimate authority, only arms for the correct benefit. So, torture, custodial violence, fabricated evidence, collective punishment, all of these examples will come here about ends versus means. Then, the next issue is that of welfare and public interest, the ethical implication of having the right to bear arms, right? So, the question was the arms are fair when the intent of bearing them is just. Here, what I'm saying is that the right reason, the right intent to bear arms is for better policies, for public welfare, for disaster evacuation, for things like traffic regulation, for restrictions which are defensible, for the benefit of others, right? So, this is a consequentialist point that we're making here. Then, it is necessary and legitimate to use force for the rule of law and constitutional morality. Then, there should not be use of coercion. Use of coercion also has to be in specific cases against the negativity. Then equity and distributive justice, transparency, accountability, prevention of paternalism and consequences of actions. So again, I'm saying how can we analyze the implications in governance? These are the dimensions that you may want to follow. For example, when I talk about the consequences of an action, the intentions should be evaluated in the light of the consequences that you're seeing, right? So a consequentialist way of checking the intent of the action is the policy well executed, is the policy going to have the correct impact? So you should do the impact assessment, environmental social impact assessment. That is what I mean by implication in governance. Next question was, citing serious adverse effects of a long term medication, a doctor convinces the family of a female patient for surgery, though her original choice were medication. Explain the concept of paternalism and beneficence by analyzing the doctor's action. Now, this is a question which is becoming controversial for people here. This and one of the case studies. There are multiple questions from medical ethics in this paper. So, we have to talk about these questions a little more carefully. Demand is to explain the concept of paternalism and beneficence. Introduction is you define the two and you give the context, or you may even start with the context only. The body is the analysis of the doctor's conduct, and the conclusion is justified medical guidance versus what is the intervention only for paternalism. So, doctor's actions are between beneficence and paternalism, and what we have to identify is that right now it could be a ethical breach. Beneficence in the doctor's action is coming from the ideas of prevention of harm, meaning that the doctor is trying to give the surgery so that the patient does not have future harm in the sense of, you know, uh, in the sense of avoiding the serious adverse impacts. Then promotion of health, that they want the better health of the patient. Apart from that, professional duty, it is the doctor's duty to give the right treatment. Then long term welfare of the patient and responsible counseling, to be able to tell the risks of the medication and the benefits of the surgery. The doctor's future health, the patient's future health also has to be identified, right? All those things are the good intentions of the doctor. The paternalism of the doctor is coming from different aspects. Now see, the treatment preference is overshadowing the patient's choice because it was the family who was convinced. Doctor has convinced the family rather than first ensuring the patient's consent, which means that the patient's consent is being violated here. The patient may give reluctant consent, excuse me, after the family has agreed, and because of that there may be pressure, fear, or emotional dependence on family. right? Then the doctor may have assumed medical this expertise. What that means is that doctor may feel that because they have the medical expertise, they have to make the decision for the patient, and that is the true idea of paternalism, right? That they are feeling entitled to make the patient's choice instead of the patient making their own choices with autonomy. Now, paternalism can only be justified if paternalism would have been justified if the patient is not able to make the decision making. Patient does not have the decision making capacity. If there is an immediate threat to life and consent, right? Meaning that if the problem is that the patient has an immediate threat to life, okay, and the consent cannot be taken from the patient right now, they're simply unconscious or unable to give consent, reasonably consent cannot be obtained, in that case the doctor's this thing paternalism may be allowed. Then the patient may not possess adequate information and doctor is helping to understand, so in that process a little bit of paternalism may be justified, that they are explaining what the issue may be. Then, intervention is proportionate, evidence based, and least restrictive. That is also an element here. Then, action is directed solely towards the patient's welfare. Only in these cases, this paternalism would be okay. But paternalism is unethical when the patient is competent and has made an informed decision. If the patient is telling you this is what they want, this is not something that the doctor gets to choose, right? The doctor does not get to make the choices for the patient. Then the doctor exaggerates or conceals the risks. They may exaggerate the benefit of the surgery and conceal the risk of the surgery, right? Then the family is used to pressurize the patient. Even then, the paternalism is bad. Financial incentives, hospital targets, professional convenience influence the decision. That now we see this type of coercion in the way that cesarean deliveries are pushed on women. They may not need it, but because the hospital makes better money, or perhaps that there is financial incentive, so for that perhaps certain medical interventions may be pursued. After that, the patient's cultural preferences, pain tolerance, financial condition, and all these things are ignored. Sometimes the patient may be asking for pain relief, and there perhaps the patient may be happy with whatever the long term risks may be, right? So those elements may be ignored in this case. And then alternative treatments and second opinions are not disclosed. That this is one doctor's opinion. It could be that by asking a second opinion, the situation may change. So that is why in this question overall, the structuring is that you have to explain the idea of beneficence and paternalism that we've done. Now, in terms of ethical balance, you can say that paternalism is okay in this case and not. Please note that this analysis cannot happen for beneficence. Beneficence is never to be violated. It is only that paternalism may create this intervention with that. All right, that is something we have to be careful of in this answer, right? The question was explain the concepts. Yes, so primarily it is important for us to core demand explain the concept of paternalism and beneficence. Then the next question is, efficiency is doing things right, while effectiveness is doing the right thing. How do you strike a balance between the two to enhance productivity? I want you to pay attention to the fact that we've not been asked to explain what is efficiency and this thing effectiveness. This is the thesis statement. This is giving us the context. The core question is, how do you strike a balance? So that is why please remember proportionality in this question. So in the beginning, you may want to write efficiency and effectiveness, but write that difference in short. It is required that you write that difference in short language in very quick succession. There's something wrong with this. Okay. So it is necessary that you write efficiency versus effectiveness in short. I'm giving you a sample of the difference so that you're able to finish it in half a page. Please note that again, forum standard is that we tend to write criteria separately whenever we want to write the differences in short. So we write core concern of efficiency is process and resource use, whereas effectiveness is more about the outcome and the purpose of the action. The focus of efficiency is on cost, time, manpower, productivity, whereas effectiveness concerns itself with impact, relevance, and whether the goal was achieved. The risk of efficiency is that output can happen without meaningful result, and the risk of effectiveness is goals may be achieved, but there could be a lot of wasted resources. The example is efficiency is fast disposal of files, whereas effectiveness is whether the citizen grievances were actually resolved or not. Now, this is also a case in which you may want to make your standard diagram. I want to remind you that in answer writing, all of these things are still possible. We are taking one example each and every question. But of course, see slippery slope diagram, and this is a simple Venn diagram, that between efficiency and effectiveness, you may want to say that if you're writing the definition in one line, your analysis could actually be that efficiency alone. So efficiency alone can lead to optimizing the wrong process, producing output without social value, mechanical target achievement, and successful failure. The concept of successful failure, that even though the job was done, but the outcome was not generated. And effectiveness alone, effectiveness without efficiency, can lead to desirable goals at unsustainable cost. It can create duplication, delays, and resource waste. It can create dependence on extraordinary individuals and extraordinary events, and weaken financial responsibility, fiscal responsibility, and justice. Now, both of these starts are acceptable to me in this question. You may want to write the difference. You may even say why alone one of them are insufficient. But the core demand is how do you strike a balance? And for that, I'm giving you many points, because what we have to realize is that it is important for us to generate the core demand and not just the differences. So, to strike a balance, it is necessary for us to begin with the clarity of purpose. The core public problem, the purpose of the institution, has to be identified first when the program is being designed. The departmental objective, the charter, the vision and mission has to be very clear, so that at the outset the goal becomes clear and efficiency comes in later. It is important for us to have an outcome oriented administration, that there should be measurable and time bound objectives. The outcomes should be checked, the indicators and indices should be created, and there should be monitoring of programs. If something fails, if there is a discrepancy, then there should be revision of the programs also, right? So, this is what we say about the outcome oriented process. Then, it is important for us to prioritize and sequence the task, meaning to be able to have effectiveness and this thing efficiency both. It is necessary for us to do the tasks in the right order. It could be about urgent versus important. There could be things which are urgent but they may not be important, right? There could be interventions which are required to fix cyclic problems and repeated periodic problems which are coming up, right? The Pareto principle should be applied. What that means is that the things which have the most benefit should be done, right? Sunken cost fallacy should be avoided. That means that if there is something which is not creating the benefit that we want, if there is something which is no longer serving the purpose, if it's not effective anymore, that should be stopped. That will lead to efficiency. Then there should be use of technology with a human interface. Technology can be used to improve efficiencies, and here again there are many points you can write. So digitization could be there, you can have targeting, exclusion, all these things, inclusion exclusion errors, that technology can be utilized to improve the human interface. Then it is important for us to simplify procedures. One of the reasons that both efficiency and effectiveness is lost is because procedures may be complicated, they may be redundant, they may be unnecessary, there can be too much documentation. It can be that there is too many steps, there are too many windows, too many steps to a process, so a single window clearance could be helpful. It could also be that if routine checks are delayed, because of that the problems may snowball. So all those things should be improved. Then after these points, what you can write is, so those points I've put in short, and then you have the new ones, that it is important for us to have teamwork and delegation to improve efficiency and effectiveness both, so that people will have clear responsibilities and roles, and they bring in their own X factor and improve the situation. Then it is important to maintain quality and ethical standards, that we must use feedback and have continuous improvement. There should be building of ethical and motivated teams, and apply the Pareto principle and opportunity cost analysis. Overall, what I'm saying is that efficiency should not be achieved by compromising security or safety or labor rights and benefits. It is also important that feedback and continuous improvement is there, that audits are there, that data and feedback is paid attention to. And I'm saying that teams should be ethical and motivated, because then they become more effective in their work, right? All these points you could make. Again, I'm giving you 10 points for the core demand. If you're writing 6 or 7, that would be great, because we are already adding the implicit demand before the answer. But if you are able to write many points, 8, 9, 10, 11 points in your answer, then this is the priority and not that. All right, please always remember that core demand will bring you more value. Next question was uh, okay, so I've given what examples you can write also: healthcare, justice, education. So next question was, schools in remote areas do not fully comply with the government regulations, but strict enforcement would close most of them down. How would an administrator strike a balance between enforcement of rules and educational rights of children? So again, this is also a how will you strike a balance question, right? So here also we're looking for the way forward. Here also we're looking for the course of action in the demand in the answer. Okay. So introduction is the conflict between administrative duty and child's fundamental right to education. Body is going to be the balanced course of action, and conclusion has to be that overall the educational quality has to be improved instead of reducing and destroying the access to schooling that exists, right? So it is important for us to write the balance measures. Now, when you're starting this question, I'm giving you two ways of adding value to this type of question also. Because this is a case study type question, you may want to write the stakeholders first. Who are the different stakeholders included here? So that when you're writing the course of action, you will be able to pay attention to each of these and your answer will reflect this structuring. You may also want to write it from the perspective of ethical dilemmas and issues that exist in this case. When there is this conflict between right to education and regulatory approvals, then these are the problems which exist, and your course of action will address these issues. Do we understand that if we pick the right type of start to the question, that can help us prepare for the core body of the answer as well? So the recommended course of action in this case actually is that we would want to conduct a comprehensive assessment first. What that means is that we would want to ensure that we have an assessment in which we first have gradation of different schools, that these are the schools which are the most critical violators, these are the ones which are minor deviations, and these are ones which are just these norms are not applicable to these schools also. Perhaps it is a school in a remote area, or perhaps it's specific to a different intervention as it is, right? So there it will prevent a mechanical one size fits all approach if you have the right type of comprehensive assessment. Then the children have to be protected from immediate danger. What that means is that if the schools are failing on regulations which have been created for the benefit, for the security, for the safety of children. So for example, if it has to do with the this thing, damage to infrastructure, right? If it has to do with that there are hostels or transport, say school transport is not adequate, or perhaps the food which is given in the school is not adequate, perhaps the children are not, the girl children do not have the infrastructure that they need, perhaps the toilets, the safety lighted, the different whatever infrastructure is required, if these things are not present, right, then the children are actually in danger. So these are the issues which have to be prioritized, these violations have to be prioritized when you're doing this assessment. Then it is important to issue a time bound compliance notice. What that means is that whenever there are certain violations, you have to actually give a notice. You have to tell the school that this is the violation, this is the responsible authority, this is the correction that is required. You are supposed to do it in this time period, and this is the support and this thing, technical financial support which is available from the authority. So if you give that proper notice, then the schools will be able to correct their deficiency, right? Direct closure is not a good idea. Then if you're committing this, so naturally then administrative financial support should also be provided, that teachers should be deployed, funds should be given, and so on. Local participation should be there, so that school management committees, gram sabhas, parent intervention, all of these stakeholders are involved in it. Then There should be differentiated and phased standards. What that means is that certain standards, safety, non-discrimination, basic sanitation, these are non-negotiables. And phased compliance can be about buildings, technology, specialization, these things. That certain things are non-negotiables and certain things are desirables. According to that, these regulations have to be separated. Then it is important to monitor outcomes and not merely infrastructure. It is important for us to realize that attendance, retention, foundational literacy, numeracy, the actual learning outcomes are measured, not just the school's infrastructure, not just the elements of the schools, so that you have to see that you're making a recent assessment. And willful negligence, if the schools are intentionally breaking the rules and not following willfully, then strong action has to be taken there. So my course of action actually is to be able to support the children so that right to education is not violated, but the way that the rules are implemented, that has to be improved here. Value addition can come in from the references to articles here, and in this case I say that this is non-negotiable. What I mean is that it's important for us to be able to write Article 21, 21A, 14, 15.3, DPSP references, all these things should come in. If you're able to give me relevant case laws, that's also a good idea. And if you want to write about the different values which are in associated here, that is okay. But I would give primacy to these ideas, right? Right to education elements should be included first. Next question. In international relations, ethical considerations are often subjugated to the strategic interests of nation states. Discuss this from an ethical perspective. It feels like we have two questions from international ethics now. Okay. So the introduction is going to be the tension between realism and national interest. Body is going to be examined. So we've been asked to discuss this from an ethical perspective. Why is it that ethics becomes subjugated to national interest? That is what we have to explain. What are the consequences? Conclusion has to be how to balance and what is the desirable outcome. So ethics in IR, I had told you that the value will come from us being able to refer to different philosophies and the core ideas that we study in international ethics. So why is ethics subjugated? It could be because we have the primacy of national national security. What that means is, now see, national interest is something that you have a diagram for also, that it is the survival of the nation and economy and politics and everything. If you write that diagram here, again, good value addition here from your notes. So there is primacy of national security. What that means is that military alliances, arms, expansion, surveillance, all of this is often validated for national security reasons, and for that they may want to override civil liberties and humanitarian considerations and human rights. Right? So this is the primacy of national security. The second point is that there are also elements of power politics. Power politics and realism. What that means is that moral principles are considered secondary to strategic necessity, which is a Machiavellian thought, that it is only power which is important and not other things in politics. Then alliances are actually formed on basis of common interest and not on shared values. Often there is an economic or political interest for alliances that are created in international spheres. Then states states will even support authoritarian or bad regimes if they have a benefit from it, right? That if there is Russia who requires certain support, they're even able and happy to make friends with North Korea, knowing that it is a strange regime. So that double standards can also emerge from all this. Then that the interests are economic and resource based, that national interest becomes important sometimes because of economic necessity, because of resource, for example strategic access to fossil fuels, perhaps for um, this thing rights violations and all, rights violation and public commitments may be violated simply for economic and this thing natural resources. So here you can give the example of this year's this thing blockade. Hormuz crisis can be linked to here, that again the national interest became important simply because of these resource complications. Then it could be an issue of sovereignty and non-intervention, that sometimes state sovereignty will limit the application of ethics. And then geopolitical rivalry, and sometimes we forget all about ethics when it has to do with a power competition, when it has to do with the type of double standards when it comes to competition there. Ethical concerns. Ethical concerns here are the fact that human rights have to be identified instead of national interest. It is also important for us to have just war and the use of force which is proportionate. So there also ethics is visible. Then refugees and humanitarian responsibilities also ask for us to remember ethics in international sphere. And when it comes to environmental ethics, the ability to solve planetary crisis also come about can also come from this thing, environmental ethics. So a student is asking, ma'am, can we write about economic nationalism? Absolutely. I think your name is Shiv. I do, it's this thing, uh, what do I say, handle. But what I was saying was that your idea of economic nationalism is something which can add value from this group. Meaning, I had said that if you write these philosophies in this answer, that brings in value addition here, because the question itself is that discuss this from ethical perspective. So value is going to come from you writing philosophies like economic nationalism, like realism, like pacifism, principle of stature, responsibility, in context of these examples that I'm talking of here. Right? Okay, Nachin. Yes. Right. So you may write economic nationalism. Then what is the consequences? Now see, this is the part of the implicit demand in this question. Please note, question says that you discuss this from an ethical perspective. Our discussion could be that ethical concerns should also be there. It can be that principles are being violated. You can even say that if ethics are subordinated, so these bad things can happen. Now, as I said, implicit demand has to be lower in proportion from the core dimension of the answer. That means that if you're able to convert this into a diagram for me, if you're able to make a bubble diagram of consequences of subordinating ethics, one, two, three, four, elements of this you're writing there, that will also amount to a good value addition to this answer. I'm giving you points, but it's not necessary that you write all 8, 2, 3, 4, 5 points that you want to write in the diagram will suffice. Then you may want to do value addition by writing India's ethical approach, that India does it the right way. So Panchsheel, Vasudev Kutumbakam, non-alignment, all these things students have reported to have written in their answer. And I'm saying that both of this type of value addition is allowed here. I repeat myself that when the question is short, the question is just discuss this from an ethical perspective. It is up to us to be able to open dimensions, and that is why these dimensions are acceptable in this year's paper. Then what is the way forward? Now this is important here, that you should write and ask for principled realism, strengthen multilateral institutions, ethical use of force, ethical diplomacy, global public goods, global civic society. And what I mean by this is that if you make a permutation and combination of any 2 or 3 of these different points, you may write a conclusion from any 3 of these. To conclude your answer, you just give what is the way forward and you write one of these points, and it is absolutely fine if you choose any of these. Right? They are all equivalent, but this is what your conclusion has to be made of. So I want us to understand that we have this type of variability in the answer, but the structure of the answer remains consistent. Next question was, on the request of his personal assistant, the district magistrate stops the transfer of a school teacher who takes private tuition for his daughter diagnosed with learning disability. Discuss the aspects of empathy versus compliance with rules. So here there is this core dilemma which has been given in the question, and we have to discuss the aspects. You have to talk about empathy and compliance with rules. So the conflict is between impartiality and empathy. Body is the issues and suggestions here, and conclusion is empathy and discretion. So what has happened here is that impartiality, objectivity, public trust is violated. The ethical issues is that here it is a test of empathy and compassion, that we have slippery slope, misplaced empathy, that enforcement of rule of law and impartiality is that question, that the rule of law is being implemented simply for the whim, for the benefit of the person who's making the rules. Then conflict of interest and misuse of office is a potential issue here. Justice to other teachers should also be there. If this is why if such interventions are possible, so then other teachers would also be doing something good. Then there has to be child's best interest which has to be kept at heart, and there is a risk to child's interest here. The suggested course of action here, And here I'm giving you what are the ways in which this can be resolved. See, discuss the aspects of empathy versus compliance of rules. You may want to write all of these issues. You can write it from the point of view of the empathy also. You can write it from the point of view of compassion also. That is why I'm leaving it short. That you may want to choose which way you're writing. Right? Then the course of action you can write is, and this is more for your education and less for writing in the exam. The question was about how to solve the issue. What is the problem? But here I want you to have your attention for next year's exam also, that one of the ways that we prepare for the exam is that they may ask us the issues today, but they'll ask us for the resolution tomorrow. So the resolution of this case is that you must declare the issue formally. It is important for us to seek relevant evidence, that the rules should be examined, that perhaps there is an aspect that the transfer can be stopped because of such a requirement. Then it is important to apply this criteria to everywhere, right? If there are other teachers also who can benefit from such an intervention, other children who can benefit from such an intervention, that should be applied. If there is a conflict of interest, this particular DM may want to recuse themselves from this decision. A time bound accommodation could be there, that the exchange of teachers can happen in a phased manner, that till the time that the child needs the specific teacher, perhaps till then the teacher can be withheld and then they can be transferred. So again, there are different ways in this it can be solved. Naturally, you can write this in the course of action in the conclusion also, or you may consider this only for your academic enrichment. All right, but the core demand of the answer is to be able to write these issues and something in the resolution, which can include, of course, that you instruct the PA to submit a formal request. It could be that you follow institutional channels and so on. That is what I've explained here. Please note again that a group of these, a subset of this is the right answer. I'm not expecting you to write 10 points in course of action in your answer, all right? Next question was, some moral philosophers argue that spending some of your resources to help other people who badly suffer is our moral duty and not merely a matter of charity. Justify this claim by explaining the distinction between duty and charity. This is a question that, see, it's coming as the last question in part A, because of which oftentimes students are writing this question in a lot of hurry, right? That it could be happening that they're writing this in hurry and you'll miss certain elements of question interpretation. This question has asked us to have reference to this statement. Justify this claim, which makes this thesis statement important to us. First element that you have to pay attention to. The second thing we have to pay attention to is that here they are saying some moral philosophers. As your teacher, I'm advising you that if the hint is there in the question about some moral philosophers, please make a reference to a moral philosopher in your answer. If you tell me any moral philosopher who has talked about charity, if you tell me anything about duty and charity, the conflict, that will bring extra value to this answer because the hint was there in the question. So if you are mindful of those hints, you can earn extra marks in these questions. Introduction, you define duty and charity. Body, what the differences are and what is the duty to support. And conclusion, compassion as a moral responsibility. So, difference between duty and charity. Duty is nature, is moral obligation, charity is voluntary. Motivation of duty is responsibility and justice. Charity happens for compassion and generosity. Expectation of the duty is that it must be performed, and charity that it is individual choice. Beneficiary's role in the duty is of a claim and entitlement, whereas for charity it is a favor or a gift. Duty is accountability. Duty comes with accountability. If there is failure to do the duty, then there is some blame which is accorded. But if charity is not done, it is not something which you can be held accountable for. For example, it is your duty to pay taxes, but it's your charity if you want to donate to a preferred cause. Ethical concerns for duty is to ensure minimum ethical standards, and charity is to enable generosity and service. Please note, you have to explain the distinction, because of which, if you're able to write these many points, that will be counted in core demand, which is a good idea here. All right. So most of your answer is going to come in from here. You can present it in different ways. Across your discussion, if you notice, I've given you multiple types of presentation. I've given you the Venn diagram. I've given you the timeline in which national security and use of force, right? Human rights. So there we have that distinction. So again, these things, these concepts can be represented in different ways, but essentially you have to communicate the difference. Now, how can it become a moral duty? See, explaining the distinction between duty and charity, but the claim has to be justified that sometimes it is necessary that it becomes our moral duty and not a matter of charity for us to do and share our resources. So, it can be because of utilitarian reasoning, especially when it comes to hoarding of wealth and resources. That when we are talking about billionaire culture, utilitarianism wise, it may become necessary for us to share. It can be about ensuring universal human dignity. If your actions can promote universal dignity, if you can protect someone from violation of their rights, from violation of their um, this thing of their uh, existence as a human being, there of course it becomes a moral duty to help, right? Apart from that, there can be certain duties that arise from privilege. Again, talking about the concept of trusteeship, if you have certain privilege of power of resources, that should be given to other people. Then there is the idea of common humanity and empathy, which should be ensured. What that means is that beings share this common bond, this moral bond of vulnerability. And if in that moment of humanity you're able to help someone, there also it does not become an act of charity, it becomes a moral duty. So, for example, if um, you're able to relieve someone's suffering just by passing a smile, so that is something which is not something that you've done for charity, that is just combined humanity. Then, when it comes to social contract and reciprocity, if you benefit from social cooperation, if you benefit from public trust, from public this thing, resources, public infrastructure, public goods, so then there is this social contract and reciprocity which should be maintained. That will include concepts like benefiting from taxpayer benefits and say social security and public goods and transit systems. All these things should be respected. Then justice rather than benevolence, that assistance is not merely charity but sometimes it has to do with justice. What that means is that if it has to do with the somebody who's doing their job, say even when it's talk about civil servants doing their job, so it has to be the servant mentality and not a power mentality there. So there it is not about their benevolence but whether they're doing justice to their role. And overall it enables character and moral development. Again and again we've said that charity is not to exist because of sharing of resources, but for the person to be able to become charitable, for you to have that value to be able to develop, so that you're able to develop generosity, to be able to share as a concept. So that is why that is also an element here. And with this, we can come to the case studies. And I had a question for case studies. That, ma'am, in the case studies, they had told us to discuss the options and choose the options and explain the reason behind choosing the option. I did not explain why I didn't choose the other option. Will they deduct marks? See, you have the you have to give the reason for choosing the option. It can be a positive reason also, it can be a negative reason also. Meaning that what this means is that the question's demand was what are the options available. So you can say option 1, option 2, option 3, or whatever many options you've written, right? Then the demand was that you discuss the options. So you've discussed merits, demerits, and elements of the options throughout. After that, say for example, you select one option. Okay? The demand of the question is that you have to give the reason and rationale for choosing that option. Okay? The reason and rationale for choosing this option can be that it has many good outcomes. It can be that it has few bad outcomes, right? And these reasons are coming from this option only, right? So if this is the option that we're talking about, then this is only for this option. Other reasons for selecting this option can be that the other options are even worse, right? What you have to remember is that when you're giving the justification, it can be a mix of these. It is not necessary that there only be one type of reasoning. Marks will not be deducted if you've not written one reason why you've not chosen option 1. That is okay. But if your reasoning is coherent, it is comprehensive, then you will get the marks. This amount of variability is allowed in the exam. All right, Saurav? Okay. Now, let me move to the questions. So, the first case study we have to talk about is this case study about Lata, who's a mother of 2 children admitted in the hospital, and she was supposed to get uh, a routine investigation right? So there was this investigation, there was some sort of tumor, and she was in general anesthesia. And there, the doctor decides to remove Lata's uterus without consent. That is the case here. The question is discuss the ethical issues involved in this case and the moral conduct of the doctor in this situation. So instead of writing everything here, I'm going to discuss the concepts here. See, in this case, the introduction is something which becomes important, and here you have to give me the core dilemma. The core dilemma is the patient autonomy versus the doctor's duty of beneficence and non-maleficence. Right? This is what we had to write there. Then you may give me a one-line reasoning in this question also, that Dr. Mansi may have intended to prevent a second surgery, but what has happened is that she's done a surgery without consent. Right? So that is something which has to be identified. You can even say that a good intention cannot substitute for valid, informed, and specific consent. The issue here is that consent was not taken in the way which is necessary. All right, so that is the issue here. Now, what are the ethical issues involved? The first issue is that bodily autonomy has been violated. Lata had only consented to a diagnostic laparoscopy under general anesthesia. Laparoscopy means that they make a small incision in the body, and from that the camera and the tools go in. Right? That is what she consented to. She did not consent to radical hysterectomy. That she did not consent to her uterus being removed altogether. Right? Consent for a diagnostic procedure cannot ordinarily be concerned as consent for a major therapeutic surgery. Now, if you have the reference of the Supreme Court case, which is Samira Kohli versus Dr. Manchanda. So the case is Dr. P. Manchanda, I think. Dr. Supreme Court has held that consent must be real, voluntary, competent, and based on adequate information about the procedure, alternatives, risks, and consequences. Now, I want you to note that I am referencing these cases more intentionally in the case study instead of writing them in part A. Of course, you can write it in both places, but in case study, please note this question. This question only has two demands. Two things have been asked. What that means is that you have to actually explain the issues in detail. The ethical issues in this case is worth 10 marks. So you have to be able to explain them more carefully. One of the things you will notice in this paper is that because the entire paper feels like case study, when you reach the case studies, you may be starting to feel exhaustion about writing. And that is what can end up becoming the potential, separator, the thing that matters, the differentiator in the actual exam. Were you able to write case studies with decent detail in them? All right, so I'm saying that it's a good idea that you make a reference to this case about the consent, and those of you who are preparing for next year should note it down. Then, so the thing is that in this case, again, just because she's the mother of two children does not mean she doesn't need her uterus anymore. Her consent does not get extinguished only because she's had two children, whether or not she wishes to retain her reproductive organs. The second thing is that this will affect her body's integrity, her reproductive capacity, her identity, future choices. And then the uterus is not just for bearing children, right? A lot of other physical and her physiological processes may be affected by that. So that is the first issue. The second issue is that of paternalism, and this paternalism is something that I want you to carry forward from the other questions that you've studied. In part A, if you've come across the question on paternalism, you should be able to link the concept here also, right? Medical ethics does not change, right? So that is the issue here, that the doctor is acting with paternalism. Then third thing is about invalid consent. See, the consent that you have is actually surrogate consent. The sister-in-law's consent has been taken, even though it is taken in written format. But what has happened is that this consent has been taken for an irreversible permanent operation on Lata. right? That patient is temporarily unable to this thing communicate, right? The relative's role was there to represent the patient's wishes, not the relative's this thing wishes also. The second thing I want to bring your attention to here is that the consent which has been taken is from the sister-in-law. Even if the consent was to be taken by someone else, it had to be a closer relative. See, again, a woman's decisions about her reproductive organs, especially when it comes to, say, during childbirth, during that period, during that situation, of course it could be the father of the child which could be consulted, but even then that is a stretch, right? Ideally it has to be the woman's bodily autonomy, the woman's choice. But if she is not there, then perhaps it will be the father in case of reproduction, in case of the father of the children, in case of a reproductive choice. And if the woman is again, it's not about reproduction, then perhaps it can be about her parents also. But that is a limited circle. Sister-in-law is a further distance to be able to make this decision and to give consent here, right? So again, this consent does not make this decision ethically valid. Then is the principle of non-maleficence. What happens is that Dr. Mansi has operated and worked and acted from the principle of beneficence, that this will be at the benefit, this will be beneficial to Lata. But the problem is that that does not amount to non-maleficence. What that means is that the doctor thought that she's going to do something good, but while doing something good, something bad should not happen to the patient, right? So, although beneficence may be operating here, but non-maleficence has not happened. All right. So, the problem is that now this hysterectomy, this removal of the uterus, that may cause permanent physical problem. It can also cause psychological problem for the patient, right? Plus, the second thing is that the reason for extracting the uterus is the presence of the tumor, right? The presence of the tumor, whether or not it is a malignant tumor, whether or not it is a problematic tumor, that has not been established yet. That means that the reason of beneficence, the reason why the uterus was removed, that itself has not been scientifically validated yet. So that is again a reason why this is a bad action, right? Then the last thing is about ends versus means. That right now the ends, the requirement is simply the benefit of this woman, but in the means through which this is happening, gender justice is being violated, reproductive rights are being violated here. That means that paternalism and gender decision making is happening. What that means is that, people think that a woman's uterus can be removed simply, motherhood is an employ, so just because you're the mother of two children, now your uterus is no use. See, again, so that is a gender issue here, right? So the in the means of doing this good end, Dr. This thing Mansi has perpetrated this injustice. Apart from that, there is a violation of trust and patient confidentiality, a professional accountability here. Dr. Mansi was supposed to protect the patient Lata, but what she's doing is that she's actually following what she thinks is the right thing to do. So Lata will feel betrayed, the patient's trust has been violated here. So all these ethical issues you have to explain in detail here. Even though the motive was good, it is that the action has become bad. Do we understand? So that's why it is necessary that we write this part in detail. Okay. Now, the second part is the conduct of Dr. Mansi. So the heading is moral conduct of Dr. Mansi. See, when you are judging her conduct, please note the question again. It says that discuss the moral conduct of the doctor in this situation. You may simply want to criticize her work here because we've already established the issues here, but you may want to write it from both directions, reasons why it was good and reasons why it was bad. I suggest that you take the second option because as a 10-mark question we will want to include a lot of content here. I want to stretch out my answer, which is why I will make that choice of doing both, because of which I'll say that there are certain justifications, that there are certain justifications and there are certain ethical violations also what you have in the middle are the criterias, right? So justifications in Dr. Mansi's favor. Number one, she acted promptly when she discovered a tumor. If it is malignant, then her action was absolutely correct. What if it was a cancerous thing? So then but that depends on what the outcome may be. Her intention was pure, that is for sure. She did not have malified intentions. She was not aiming to hurt Lata or her future, right? She wanted to help her only. She did obtain some written consent from whoever was available. The doctor asked the accompanying relative, whoever it was. Now, the doctor is not in charge as to who's coming with the lady. Then, if there was a genuine life threatening emergency, then this action would have been completely defensible, right? But that depends on whether this situation was life threatening. Right now, in this case, we don't know. We are not doctors. We don't know what happens in detail in that tumor, and how big the tumor was or whatever, right? So those elements we do not know. If that was true, then this action would be supported. So these are the reasons why we could justify this action, right? See, again, we don't know in this case whether it was a huge tumor. If it was a huge tumor, then again, while removing the tumor, the problem could be that the uterus would get damaged irreversibly. Then perhaps Dr. Mansi took the right decision. But the truth is that we don't know. Okay. The ethical shortcomings. Number one, she has extended Lata's consent. Lata consented to a laparoscopic diagnostic, which she has extended to include this larger operation. Dr. Mansi has not established the urgency of this intervention. That has to be established. If it was essential to save Lata's life, or to prevent some serious and severe damage, some major harm, then that is a problem. But Dr. Mansi has not established that. Then she relied on the consent of Sujata. That is a problem, the sister-in-law. Then she's not considering less intrusive alternatives. She could have done a biopsy, temporary closure. So oftentimes what happens is that in a surgery, some problematic thing has happened. They'll stitch up they close the wound, they'll close the surgical site, and then go seek intervention from outside. So then they may want more discussion with the family, right? So again, this postponement or consultation could also has happened. She's not considered the sterilizing impact of hysterectomy. Hysterectomy means that naturally now Lata has been sterilized without her consent, which is a big problem. Then she has not upheld shared decision making, right? Reproductive autonomy she's violated here. All right. So that's why it's important that we remember that these interventions has to be clear. Now, in conclusion, you can say that even though her intention was pure, Dr. Mansi has perpetrated into an unethical act. Good intentions cannot legitimize unauthorized irreversible act, right? Value addition can come in from Article 21 right to life. You can make the references to medical ethics. You can write about this thing, do no harm principle. And I've told you about the Supreme Court judgment already. All right. So these elements were to be written in this question. Fair? Now, for the next case study, what happens in this case is that Ravi is this police officer who wanted the installation of this AI system to have predictive policing, right? And during that, what they were able to identify was that they identified this neighborhood as a center for gang violence and drug trafficking. And because of that, what happens is now people are actually protesting and saying that no, this is a falsified type of identification that has happened. Essentially, this is the issue, right? Community leaders and these people have visited Ravi's office, and they've said that no, this system is faulty. The two questions have been asked here. What are the ethical issues used in the AI driven data policing? And place yourself in Ravi's role and discuss the alternatives available. Justify the action that optimizes compliance with ethics. Saurav, is this the question that you were asking me about? That they've asked us about the options that we have to discuss? Please let me know in the chat box. Other people may also ask their questions, so that's okay. Okay. Now, the core issue here is that you have to write the ethical issues and biases, and we have to talk about the alternatives before Ravi. The first issue here is that the algorithmic and social bias is present here. What that means is that automation and AI tends to have this inherent bias there. And again, AI ethics questions, though case studies we've done many times in all in your MGP tests, it's been there. We've done it in class also. Okay. So if you are taking that AI at face value, the AI assessment, then that automation bias is there. What that means is that human judgment is not being used. They're just accepting the AI systems, new systems input, right? But the problem is that the algorithm will not eliminate human prejudice, because it may be trained on data which is coming with prejudice also, right? So that's why it is important that algorithmic and social bias can be visible in this system. The second problem is that there is a violation of natural justice here. What that means is that overall, what has happened okay, so overall what has happened is that we are able to see that the rights, the thing, the natural rights of the people in that area, they have been violated. Why? Number one, their privacy and bodily autonomy is being violated. What that means is because it is a surveillance system, without their consent they are being identified. Biometric data of persons in a crowd is being identified, linking it to police database, that is an issue. Then there is historical and representation bias, that this AI system is using old data, and that has changed, right? The people living there, communities, if say historically certain communities were over policed, now what has happened is that is leading to a negative outcome here. You can make a vicious cycle here, that if you have biased policing, that will lead to biased data will lead to biased algorithm will lead to more intensive policing and more biased data. So it is something which is creating a round more spiral and ruining of the entire data set. Then overall in this entire, we also have black box problems. What that means is that there can be selection sampling biases. It could be that overall in the system how it's doing this calculation, we may not be aware, right? Automation biases there that I've talked about. Then there is erosion of privacy and civil liberties, and even transparency, accountability. What that means is that overall, that there can be violation of the data security, right? People's data, their security, their reality is being violated. There can be function creep. That means that this system was used for bad things today, tomorrow it can be used for worse, right? It could be that again we talked about holding systems accountable. This AI system cannot be held accountable now, because of which now there is a delegation and accountability problem. So all these issues you have to write here. Then what are the options available? He may have a very strict alternative of choosing the system and having security first approach, continue with the system without any changes, right? Why? Because the AI system has improved, public order visibly. It has identified some persons alleged in crimes, right? Preventive policing can avert riots. All these benefits could be there, but again the negatives are still present. The second extreme is that you can completely suspend this AI system, that he wanted to have a new system, it does not work, so now you let it go and go back to conventional policing. That is going to reduce the risk of biometric misuse, but other problems are going to get created, right? And then the third input is that you may want human in the loop system. You may want to have certain safeguards and audits which are added to the system, right? What you will do is that you may want to improve the source and quality of the input data, right? So that can be audited and improved. You may want to identify the error rates and false positives, that you just correct and and analyze these inputs that you're getting from the AI system. You may want to check the differential impacts on communities. Is it true that only one community is being unfairly targeted, or is it true for others also? You want to check the legality of biometric this thing collection, whether or not it is legal for you to use, because internally it may be that it is legal for the security infrastructure to be able to use this data. You may want to check the accuracy of biometrics. You may want to have human oversight in the system, right? So overall you may want to have human in the loop models. With that, you may want supervisory approval, you may want written reason, periodic review. All these things could be added here. But again, I mean that when you are writing a case study answer, the answers can be more variable. So even though people are selecting to write a human in the loop system, it does not mean that across 5 different students they would have written the same way in which that human in the loop system is operating. So please remember that you have to justify the answer that you're writing, right? The nuances there, details are good, but again, details are not specific here. They're not the only ones. All right. Now, what is the justification? Justification as standard, you can give me through the benefits of the entire issue, and you can talk about utilitarian benefit, dignity, sarvodaya, prudence. All these things could be written here. All right. His responsibility is not merely to reduce the crime, but also to ensure that law enforcement itself remains lawful. So those things we have to write here. Value addition can come from Articles 14, 19, 21. You may want to write that here. Supreme Court's principle is that privacy restriction must satisfy legality. Right? So it was legality, legitimate aim, necessity, and proportionality. That must be maintained. Um, there is the concept of garbage in, garbage out. That is something you could have written here, that if the training data is garbage, then the output is also going to be garbage, right? um, and what we need is, I'll give you a tagline. You can say that it is human in command and AI in support. That the type of inputs that we want is human in command and AI in support. That this is the mechanism that we want to follow in the future when it comes to AI integration. All right. The next case was about Seema. She has a reputation of honesty, professional efficiency. I've told you that whenever we read the character of the protagonist in a case, it is required for us to pay attention to it, to remember that the course of action has to align with the character. What she sees is that in an industrial area, there is change of land use, applications are being accepted, and she suspects that there is a lot of collusive corruption that has happened here, that backlog is there, that some touts are controlling this illegal activity, subordinate officials, that a lot of corruption is happening. Two questions have been asked: what are the ethical issues, and discuss the options open to Seema, identify the recommended option and justify it. Right? So what are the options, what she should do, and what is the justification? See, the issues are going to be that there is a conflict between probity and administrative efficiency. That what has happened is that probity of the institution has been violated, right? And just for administrative efficiency, people have been able to engage in collusive corruption. The ethical issues involved, and I'm going to give you a longer list than this now. The first ethical issue is the fact that there is corruption in this case study and abuse of public office. One of the things that you have to remember to write in your case studies is that you even have to write the most obvious part of your answer. It is very obvious that corruption is happening here, but it should be identified and labeled in this case. Please don't forget to do that. So, that there is corruption which is happening, there is acceptance of bribes, the public office as a public trust is being violated, right? That public authority is being used for private gain by certain touts. This corruption is also creating an entitlement based administrative service into a rent seeking transaction. So this phrase is important, that it has become a rent seeking. That it has become a rent seeking transaction. That is an issue. Then I'm saying that there is a violation of equality and fairness overall. What that means is applications have been selected separately, right? There is selective selection of these, selective approval of these applications. They have nothing to do with chronology. They have nothing to do with objective pattern. There is no amount of, discernment which has been applied there. They are just selecting certain applications to be approved. There, the equality for the other applicants is violated. Equality before law is violated, because of which the process has become unfair. So that is what we have to write there, right? Because of that, there is a breach of trust. So there is corruption, there is breach of trust. Then there is delay and administrative inefficiency which is created here. This backlog has been accumulated. Employees are fearing that corrupt network will not help them do their task. So administrative inefficiency is being created now, right? It also means that there is ethical negligence, that this administrative delay could be avoided, but it is being continued. Then there is an abuse of power and there is a climate of fear. That work culture has now become toxic. There is apathy in the work culture, right? The corrupt officials have created this fear in the other officials' mind, right? That I'm also saying that work culture is bad because people are complicit and there is collective responsibility of this, right? Touts would not have been able to operate if the entire office was in knowledge of this, right? So SEMA has to distinguish between the active participants, the negligent officials, who was intimidated. So now she has to conduct this investigation amongst these people. There is a conflict between transparency and confidentiality, right? That this confidentiality is being misused to be able to create an opaque system. Then there is institutional legitimacy which is violated. What I mean by this point is that this aggressive action can get this thing opposition from labor union and create disruption here, right? But public interest is also necessary, because of which now the institution faces this problem, that the legitimacy of the institution is at question but its stability is at under threat in the short term. So that is also creating a complication here. And overall, that we have economic injustice and regulatory capture, right? That development versus integrity is becoming an issue here. And again, the means and ends both are bad in this case, right? It's not means versus ends, but it is a complete failure of both means and ends in this case. So these issues we have to write here. And now, what are the options available? Again, she can have slow internal inquiry. She can raid, suspend, and have strict action. She can even have graded approach. I'll give you other options that you could have written. That you may only want to transfer the suspected officials and refer the matter to vigilance agencies. That is an option that I will accept. You may want to write an option of digitizing and reforming the process. That is also an option, an intervention that we can support. One of the things that you should include in your course of action is seeking cooperation of unions and honest officials, because you have to restore the trust, right? The work culture in this group. So, what is the course of action that I'm suggesting here? I'd written it in short, so there has to be a streamline of the process where, wait, whatever course of action you're selecting, it should have an element of streamlining the process, fixing the CLU process, enforcing the rules, and improving the workplace culture. So I'll give you ways and means to be able to do this. One of the things that you should want to do is that you have to secure the records. The physical, digital files, the registers, the approval orders, CCTV footage, all these things have to be protected so that the investigation can happen. So, streamlined process mein you have to investigate properly, right? She needs to inform the senior authorities, the divisional commissioner, the vigilance authorities. They have to be informed. Then an independent inquiry has to be established. She may want to map the network of who all are involved in this. The complainants and whistleblowers have to be protected in this process. And you have to ensure to avoid collective punishment. Collective punishment has to be avoided, right? Now, apart from this, the next thing she has to do is she has to ensure administrative continuity. To enforce the rules without having the blockade, again she has to do something. For that, she has to create a special CLU disposal cell. You collect a group of officers and you give this task that they have to fix this backlog now, right? There has to be a transparent disposal schedule. She should create a schedule that, okay, these are the backlogs and it should happen in this phased manner. There should be a multi-officer system for scrutiny and approval. If there are certain people that you are unsure of, then it should not be a single person's discretion. There should be a mix of people making this decision. There should be public hearings for people to be able to participate in this application group, in this application disposal process. Then there should be some sort of time limit that she should instigate, and she should monitor the pendency. So what I'm saying is that to enforce the rule, she should create a system to be able to dispose it. I'm saying that there needs to be a team. There should be discretion which is distributed. she should have monitored timelines. Right? So this is what I'm saying, that this is the type of thing that she'd want to do for administrative continuity. Now, overall, she may want to have structural changes in the long term. Long term changes could be that she may want to pursue digitization, end to end online application. So, again, digitization cannot happen immediately, but in the long term, when you see that this could be an issue, that should be there. She may want to have randomized allocation of files so that people cannot hold this ability to change according to situation. She may want to have single window system, right? She may want to publish these approved and rejected applications with reasons. So again, she could have more transparency in the process. Please note that I do not intend for one student to be able to write all of this, but my intention with the case study is that I am able to give you broader outlines of the answers so that you know that if you've written something within these paradigms, that would be applicable. And for those of you who are preparing for next year, you should have a broader exposure to these points, because we wouldn't know which one is useful for which question. Then use randomized allocation. This though we've done. Then they should be install complaint channels, that maybe she wants to install some sort of helpline and grievance redressal mechanism, right? And she may want to have third party approvals and audits, right? To deal with the unions, she may want to have fair inquiry, no arbitrary mass suspension, and so on, right? To include the cooperation of the unions and honest employees. She would want to build collective ownership. She may want to encourage whistleblowers to come and tell her. She may want to establish negotiations. All these things she may want to do to restore the workplace culture. All right. So that is what we had to write in this question, question 9. Question 10. Vikas is this government officer, DC of Nainipur, hilly district, where there is improper functioning of PDS system in the EWS groups, right? So public distribution system is not operating properly in the economically weaker section, among the economically weaker section. During his visit, he is able to see a typical administrative challenge, that there was biometric failure there, right? Wi-Fi connectivity was not there. So the questions are, what are the options available to Vikas? How should he balance the fiscal probity with empathy, and discuss the ethics of technology as a gatekeeper for welfare schemes? Three things we've been asked. The first thing is, what are the options available? He may want to have rigid adherence, unregulated discretion, and create SOPs. So what I want you to remember is that this question will feel a little bit similar to the previous question. And one of the things that we have to guard against whilst writing case studies is sometimes you'll feel that it is repetitive. Okay, so that will help us. Okay, so what are the other options that you could write? He can strictly insist on biometric authentication. He may allow distributors unrestricted discretion, so unregulated discretion. Beyond this, he may want to suspend only biometric authentication and create some other way of checking. He may want to adopt a graded mechanism. He may want to add an offline or alternative authentication mechanism, right? And they can also be community verification and social audit type interventions. What I'm saying here is that, of course, apart from these two, there can be other options also, but he has to create some sort of SOP, some sort of standard operating procedure to handle such a case. Again, the demand of the question is, what are the options available? They have not asked you to analyze the options. So even if you're explaining the options, that is okay. And if instead of 3 options, you're writing 4 or 5, that is also an acceptable way of approaching this question. Then, the next part of the demand was, how should he balance fiscal probity with empathy towards the designated beneficiaries? So, to be able to balance this, right, there are 2 ways that you can write about this balance. One way is that you write the ethical issues and you write the outcomes, or you write what he should do and tell about the issues within it. All right. Now, the ethical issues is, number 1, right to food, Article 21. These are being violated. Right? There is a conflict between probity and inclusion. You want to have the best system, but inclusion is suffering there. Right? Then there is disparate impact. That means that the system is disproportionately affecting certain groups. Growing children whose biometrics will change, manual workers whose fingerprints tend to wear out, right? Elderly people who have weak or unclear fingerprints, or people who are simply living in an area with poor internet connectivity. All of these people are suffering because of this particular system. So that's why the rule is this thing equal in neutral in the visibility, but impact is unequal, right? So substantive equality is violated. Then human dignity versus administrative convenience. You want to implement the system for administrative convenience, but human dignity is being violated here. Then there is discretion versus accountability, which is suffering. Privacy and data security issues are there, transparency, accountability, all these things. Now, what is the course of action that we are suggesting? My course of action here is, number one, in the SOP, there has to be immediate handling of biometric failure. That means that, number one, this exception handling, the process, whatever SOP you are giving, should have this immediate handling elimination option. There should be some OTP option, iris authentication, face authentication, smart card, ration card, Aadhaar, some type of verification option should be given. If all digital modes are failing, then permit distribution through a written exception register. You maintain a register which is offline, and from there you can check whether it is right or not. Okay. Then the second thing is that some sort of offline functionality should be there. The devices should be created in areas, especially where there is bad Wi-Fi. Number one, there should be offline capable devices. There should be power backup. Data and transaction should be this thing stored locally, so that it should not be an issue of server is down, right? And maintain some sort of printed register also. Then distributor discretion has to be controlled. It cannot be unregulated. It has to be regulated distributor discretion, and that is something that they should be given a list. So beneficiary list should be there, biometric failure ka record they should maintain, they should have signature, thumb impression, these things they should maintain more details there. Then there should be periodic audit of the system, right? Exemption register that has to be checked constantly. Social audit should be there. Monthly reconciliation, so if to match the books, all these things which Vikas should enable people to do. Then beneficiary centered grievance redressal should happen. The beneficiaries, if they're coming to a problem, their grievances should be followed. Biometric quality can be improved. Then people have written about protection of their privacy, all these things, that all this biometric information, the data collection should be limited reasonably. So this we've written. And the last thing is ethics of using technology as a gatekeeper for government schemes. So the ethics of using technology as a gatekeeper, the technology can improve the outcomes. So the question is, so technology as a gatekeeper in welfare, this thing, delivery. There are two things. It can improve. There are benefits. And what are the benefits? Number one, it enables beneficiary authentication. The clarity has to be better, right? That reduced duplication has to be there. Transaction can be faster. Better monitoring should be there, right? Apart from that, database detection of diversion should be there. All these things have to be improved can be improved because of technology. Then technology as a gatekeeper also requires certain safeguards. The benefits can only operate if the conditions can be that there is necessity of the technology intervention, that there is proportionality, that there is human oversight, transparency, openness, accountability. All these things should be there, right? So you can write about what are the conditions through which technology as a gatekeeper will be a good element. Then the next case was about Rajpuram district. That Rajpur is a border district between Jhara and Biru. Two communities are there, and because of that, Ethical tensions between the two communities inflamed. Rajan has been appointed as the district magistrate. He realizes that intercommunity rivalry has even seeped into local administration and police, right? So overall, Rajan wanted to favor a controlled approach with opening the highway to restore food medical supplies. Overall, he is trying to decide whether he should ask for CRPF units to help restore administrative ability. All right. The questions are: discuss the ethical issues that need to be addressed in this case. What are the options, and what option would ensure protection of his non partisan image without compromising ethics? So, what are the ethical issues here? The ethical issues here: number one, there is collapse of neutrality and objectivity. Number one, the protection of life, humanitarian relief is not happening here, right? The rivalry has entered police and administration. So that's why impartiality, neutrality are also suffering. There is justice which is happening, but reconciliation which is not happening. That peace talks are happening, but accountability has not been created. So that is a problem here. Right to life and humanitarian deprivation has happened. Again, protection of life and humanitarian relief. Then there is an issue of national security versus democratic restraint, that it is necessary for him to realize that border security is there for national interest, but overall these security concerns should be addressed through intelligence, this in coordination, not through blanket suspicion of a community. So because of that, what is happening is that there is this violation of democratic restraint here. Then there is the issue of truth communication misinformation, that facts have not been established here. The problem is rumors, inflammatory messaging, all these things are exacerbating the situation, right? So you may write issues like this. Then distributive social injustice, because the क्या कहते हैं, collective responsibility and individual culpability, that overall it is not necessary that the entire community was at fault, but there is collective punishment here. Excuse me. Now, apart from all this, there is also a trust deficit which is being created in this entire situation. That the community fallout actually means that socially in this group, the trust has been violated. Then, the next part of this question was, what are the options available? He can rely on local administration, he can have heavy handed security lockdown and call in CRPF. Strategic deployment of forces is a better idea. So, other options that you may write is, again, the negative one, that he may want to impose a strict curfew and use extensive force. Right? Then it could be that the highway is opened first and then only focus on humanitarian relief is there. So that is what I mean by graded action plan. Then he may want to initiate immediate peace talks without strong security action. That again, he tries to solve the situation first without just being heavy handed. And then he may want to adopt a calibrated, integrated approach here. Right? So the course of action that we are asking for here is the graded, calibrated approach. And in that, what you have to do is, number one, there should be impartial command and assessment. Number one, there has to be impartial command and assessment. What this means is that there should be some sort of rapid security and humanitarian assessment of the affected areas and create a unified command. There can be a DM, there can be CRPF, all these people, SP representatives, all these people have to be included there, relief agencies, and then remove or reassign personnel who there is some known credible evidence of them being communally motivated. So essentially, first you have to fix this particular situation. Deploy mixed and representative teams in areas which are sensitive in nature. That has to be fixed. And there has to be independent complaint and monitoring cell so that they're able to solve the situation first. Second step is protect life and essential supplies. It is necessary for him to protect the life of the people and ensure that they're getting these essential supplies. So, reopen the highway with phased and secured corridors rather than just some abrupt random opening, but make sure that it's happening in a phased way carefully. Then deploy neutral security personnel there, right? Establish a safe route for ambulances, humanitarian workers. Ensure that relief standards are there in both camps, right? Both in both these camps, food, rations, medicine, all these things should be available, and a public dashboard should be available. If CRPF is using, CRPF use should be proportionate. They should be proportionately use CRPF, this thing, power. So they can be, their role should be limited to say highway security, protection of relief camps, separation of armed groups. So there has to be fixed places where CRPF is involved. Then it is important for him to ensure in this entire process, it is important for him to ensure impartial law enforcement. He has to check again that law enforcement is not becoming partial. FIRs have to be registered for arson, sexual crime, extortion, destruction of property. So whoever is liable, their FIRs have to be generated. Special investigation team has to be brought in from outside to check the affected network. You have to prevent collective arrest and profiling. They have to be prevented, and overall visible action against perpetrators before from both communities has to be essential, right? Then when all of these things have happened, you may even have want to have peace talks. So long term solutions are also there. Peace talks have to be initiated. It is important for these talks to respect community elders, youth representatives, so stakeholder consultation should be there. And additionally, immediate and structural issues should be addressed there. Root cause have to be addressed, right? Time bound land boundary dispute tribunal has to be created, say intercommunity development projects, all these root causes have to be addressed, and long term trust has to be established. All right, so this is what we had to write in this answer about the course of action that he has to do. And the demand was, what are the options, what options can be deployed. All right, so this is what we had to write for this question, Rajan question. The last case study in this paper was about Ajit, who was the head of the Department of Weapon Sales in the Ministry of Defense Production. He has an option between selecting the purchase requisition, this weapons order from two countries. Country A is a developing nation with sound technology base who wants to do R&D collaboration, and there is no security issue there. Country B is also a developing nation, but military strength is its priority, and it's not a signatory of NPT. There, then what is it? That guerrilla forces are also there. Ajit has discussed this case, and even though there is significant economic benefits, employment generation, everything can happen because of this sale. And it is also emphasized that refusing the deal to country B, refusing the deal could result in country B purchasing weapons from some other supplier, right? So now what has to happen is that you have to decide what to do. Options available to Ajit, which options he should select, and how can Ajit balance national economic strategic interests with ethical considerations. So what you have to identify is that in the introduction you write that defense exports are not the normal commercial ordinary transactions. There are other elements that have to be identified. It has to do with indigenous production. It has to do with who you are empowering, what the end use of these armaments may be. So all these elements have to be identified. You can even write the introduction from the point of view of the values. What that means is you may want to write it from the perspective of national security, international responsibility, right? End use certainty. All these things you have to identify. Now, there are two options essentially here. Either you purchase the order from country A, either you give the order to country A or country B. Now, some people have also created other options. uh, in which there are what do I say, innovative solutions also. There are people who've written that they want to divide the order between the two countries. Huh? Then some people are saying I will reject from both, and then till further information is this thing obtained, we will not give the order to anybody. Then they're saying that there can be interministerial assessment, that we should have some sort of collegiality here, right? And then you can say that you can give conditional priority to country A subject to safeguards. Essentially, I would say that it boils down to these options, either country A or country B. Collegiality in this case is a will amount to a little bit of abdication of your responsibility, because he's the head of the department in the ministry. And overall, uh, interministerial dialogue here is actually a complication, because it has to be done strategically. When it comes to rejecting both orders, the thing is that country B is already saying that they may get their weapons from elsewhere, and that will give a cost to the loss of business to our country. All right. So all these things are going to be included here, and you talk about the ethical issues, right? Now, the ethical issues that we're talking about in these groups. So discuss the options available, which option he should select and why. So you have to select the option of giving the order to country A. This is something I've written here. Accept the purchase order from country A and not from country B, because you cannot be complicit in weaponizing an unstable regime. That is what is required, right? So country A is preferable because its stated objective is primarily defensive, that they want the this thing to the arms and ammunition for their own defense. It has a sound technology base, and co-development and technology collaboration will be good there. It is not supporting guerrilla forces abroad, and it does not present the same immediate nuclear proliferation risk as country B, right? Long term partnership can strengthen our country, and the transfer can help a vulnerable country also develop. So these are the reasons why we should follow. But the important thing is that it cannot be an unconditional sale. There have to be certain safeguards which have to be involved here. So certain safeguards have to be involved here, and that will mean that we will want an end use legally binding certificate, right? We will want to ensure that they cannot re-export these weapons. Post shipment verification perhaps you want to do, right? That you may want to structure the loan in a specific way, so that you are having these improvements there. All right. The next part of this question was that what are the elements that you were asking for? So that's what I said, that we want resource barter agreement. We may want strict end use constraints, long term approach, and all these elements you may want to answer, add to your answer, right? The last part of this question, how to conclude, is that how can he balance nation's economic and strategic interests with ethical considerations? One of the ways for you to be able to improve your answer here is that you give me reasons why this has to be done. Number one reason is that he wants to have a multi-dimensional decision matrix. That it is not just one element, which is one factor which is enabling us to make a decision, but there are a lot of different decision elements. So economic value, employment generation, end use, all these things have to be considered. Then he also needs to prefer responsible defense exports, right? So one of the ways to balance is that he wants to prefer these responsible exports. He wants to use conditionality instead of purely binary approach, right? So he's adding that conditionality to add those elements to the this thing agreement. He may want to strengthen domestic benefits without compromising ethics, institutional accountability, and one of the ways that you have to add to this answer is through ethical values. What that means is that because this is a very applied question, it will feel like a very objective question. You including values here, that it has to do with justice, accountability, prudence, national interest, realism, right, cosmopolitanism, these things, international humanitarian law, trust but verify principle, philosophical of just war ethics, and these things. If you're adding that ethical lens here, then your answer is going to be stronger. Now, what we've done in today's discussion is that we've looked at this entire paper, and throughout this paper what we've been able to see is that most of the paper is very case study oriented. At our second glance, when I know that you see the solutions, you will feel like most of the things that I've told you to write in the answers are things that you've come across, you've studied before. But the challenge is always going to be that in the actual mains exam, the questions feel challenging because it is a new question. It is just the shock factor. But when you do want to write the answers, I'm sure that you were able to write them in the paper. I wish you all the best for your results. And those of you who are preparing for next year, I hope this was helpful. I'll see you again soon. Thank you.